few months ago, I treated my girlfriend to a vacation in Paris. We stayed at some hotel called Hotel Atmospheres. My job allows me to work remotely from my laptop on my own hours, so at some points during our couple days there, I would sit in the lounge of the hotel by the Wi-Fi area to get my work done. My phone started to ring. It was my girlfriend calling me. As I picked up the phone, I went to the nearby room where the coffee was and poured myself a cup. My girlfriend was calling me from the room, talking about the things we should do that day. When I walked back to the lounge area where I left my laptop, I got a sickly feeling when I realized it wasn't there anymore. I went first thing to the lady at the front desk to ask her if she'd seen anyone leave the lounge area with a laptop. She apologized and said she hadn't seen anyone. I asked her to check the cameras, to which she responded with there not being any cameras in the lounge area, and that she was also not in control of the footage that the cameras caught. She would have to get in contact with her manager, who was not working that day. She offered I submit a lost or stolen property form. I was absolutely disgusted with the service, and planned on having a word with the manager the next day. I had no choice but to go back to our room and angrily vent to my girlfriend. She tried calming me down, saying there was nothing we could do about it, and that it was best we just go out and enjoy the vacation I was paying for. As angry as I was, I had to accept that she had a point. We both turned off notifications on our phones so we wouldn't be distracted, something we usually did on vacation. Then we went out and explored a great amount of the city, did a little bar hopping, then got back to our hotel late at night. It wasn't until we finally crashed into bed that I opened my phone to check for new emails and texts and such, since I couldn't do that on my laptop now. When I was going through my email, I realized every single email I'd received that day was opened. This included emails from work and a couple relatives. I started to panic because I knew how much delicate information I had in not just my email account, but my whole computer, which was signed in when I left it. I basically had all my personal information saved on that computer, including home address, phone numbers, personal pictures, passwords, credit card info, bank account info. I was a fool for leaving it unattended to for even a minute. I immediately changed all the passwords to my emails and other important accounts. That didn't matter for what was about to come, though. After opening my messages app to check my texts since I hadn't been all day, I noticed text from an unknown number. It was a bunch of pictures that were saved on my computer. Bad, personal pictures that I wouldn't ever want anyone to see. Then there were pictures I didn't remember taking, pictures of a hotel hallway and a hotel door. It was our hotel door. There was also a picture of me standing at the front desk talking to the lady about my missing laptop. It was taken from behind the glass door at the entrance of the hotel. Under all of the pictures was a text saying, "I have all of your info, including your address and your current hotel room. This was sent using an untraceable phone number. Don't bother contacting the police." The rest of the message basically demanded I pay a certain amount of Bitcoin to a specific Bitcoin wallet address, or else. It literally said "or else." I'm not even fabricating this. I didn't know what else to do besides show my girlfriend the messages, as well as the embarrassing pictures. She started to panic more than me, and she honestly just made me even more tense. I left the room to go to the bathroom to think. He was asking for $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. But even if I paid that, I had no reassurance that this person wouldn't share those pictures, or keep my laptop, or do God knows whatever "or else" meant. I decided I wouldn't pay the ransom. My girlfriend agreed with my decision when I went back to bed. Of course, I was not tired at all anymore, neither was my girlfriend. We sat up, leaning on the headboard of the bed, talking, thinking, and worrying for a couple hours. Then there was a knock at the window of our hotel room. We both gasped, while my girlfriend more so let out a short scream. I turned off the lamp so that whoever was out there couldn't see in. I also shut the shade completely. I didn't bother trying to look out there to see who it was. I assured my girlfriend we were safe, though. She whispered we should call the cops or inform the front desk. I told her we would if the problem persisted. I then told her to go to sleep. Meanwhile, I stood in the middle of the room watching over her, while also looking back at the window. I got a text. I looked at my phone, and it said, "I'm looking into your room right now. I'm not playing games." Then there was another knock at the window. I decided to just grow a pair for a couple seconds and open the shade to see who was out there. I pulled the shade open. I couldn't see who it was, but there was someone standing on the other side of the glass looking in. My girlfriend screamed. I told her shh as I pulled it back shut. We packed our things and went to the front desk, telling the lady about the whole situation and requesting another room on one of the upper level floors. She said she would alert the authorities and gave us a room card to another room on the 3rd floor. For the rest of the night, we slept close together. Well, I didn't sleep. I was awake all night waiting for a knock at the door. Morning came and the manager was in, so she took a look at the footage from the previous night, and of course, some guy with a baseball cap covering 90% of his face went into the lounge as soon as I left it to get coffee, then walked out with my laptop. There was only one camera that actually caught the man in the act. She said she would forward all video footage with that man over to the police. We were out of there. I blocked the number that was texting me. I had to accept defeat, but I didn't want to think about it anymore. There was nothing I could do about where those pictures would end up or some random person having my address. I canceled my credit cards and changed my passwords. There wasn't much else that creep could do. However, what really motivated me to share this story with the internet was the fact that 3 days ago, I got a letter in the mail without a return address. It was addressed to me, and it was a short, straight-to-the-point note saying, "I hope you haven't forgotten. I have all of your information still." It was a horrible reminder that someone out there with bad intentions has not only my address, but my pictures, my phone number, and my name. I've been sleeping with one eye open these past few nights. If anything happens, I will update. There was a time a few months ago that my good friend Ashley lost her phone. I'm her best guy friend, so she hit me up on her sister's phone when she realized that whoever had her phone was reading her messages but not responding. I practically reprimanded her for not having a password on her phone. I suggested using Find My iPhone, but she didn't even have that enabled for whatever reason. I met up with her and decided to text her number. I sent a text saying, "Please return my friend's lost phone." Within seconds, it said the person read my text, but they didn't respond. So a minute later, I sent a more aggressive follow-up text. I said, "We can see that you're reading our messages. If you don't respond, we will brick the phone, track it, and it will be useless to you. Please return it now." The person read it right away and said, "Good luck." This infuriated me. I tried to respond, but apparently the person turned off the phone. There wasn't anything we could do now. She had Find My iPhone off, so we couldn't even report it as lost. I tried to make her feel better and took her out for dinner. When we got back to her house, a light upstairs was on and the garage door was open. "Are your parents home?" I asked her. "Maybe," she said, "but they weren't supposed to be back from their trip until the next day." We went in through the garage door, and she pressed the button to close it. Then we went from the den to the living room, and she called out for her parents. One of the doors upstairs shut. We could see and hear it. The way her house is arranged allows you to see some of the doors upstairs from the living room. The door wasn't shut forcefully, though. It was shut quietly and softly. Ashley looked at me, and I could see fear in her expression. I told her wait there, I'd go upstairs and check. So I went slowly up the stairs, down the little walkway, got to the door, looked down at Ashley one more time, then opened it. The room was dark now. I looked for the light switch in the room, but couldn't find it. So I said to Ashley, "Where's the light switch?" Then she screamed, "Oh my God." She said that she had her address and the code to the garage saved on her phone. It took me a second to put together what she was implying, when just then, someone grabbed my arm from inside the room and tried pulling me in. I screamed and tugged away from the grip. I started to slam the door over and over on the arm that was pulling at me, eventually getting them to let go. I heard grunting on the other side. I must have done some damage. I told Ashley to run as I came down the stairs. The front door was only a few feet away, so we got out safely. We got into my car and I called the cops right away. We sat in front of the house in my car the whole time, making sure whether to know he left the house or not. A light upstairs turned on, and 5 seconds later, whoever it was walked to the window and just stood there for a while. Couldn't tell what he was looking at, nor could we see any facial features, but I did snap at least 10 pictures to show the police when they were to arrive. Then, the guy just walked away from the window and the light shut off. Minutes later, 2 cop cars with their lights on came speeding down the road and stopped in front of the house. I showed them the pictures before they entered the house, and we waited in my car. The cops were in there a long time. They did a seriously thorough investigation of the house. They came back out to assure us it was safe to go back in. We thought for sure they would be able to track the phone now that it was used as part of a crime, but to our surprise, they said there really wasn't anything they could do without Find My iPhone enabled, or the phone actually being on for that matter. All they said we could and should do was change the code for the garage lock. I had to figure out how to do that for her, but still after that, I let Ashley sleep in my house that night. And when her parents got back the next day, she felt a lot safer. She got a new phone the next day, and we never pursued finding her stolen phone any further. March 8th, 2019, on a Friday night. Me and 5 of my college buddies had a little night out. Not anything crazy, we just got dinner at some nice restaurant, then we hit a dive bar in the same block. We got a few drinks, played darts, and within a couple hours we were out. It wasn't until we left the bar that I realized my pockets were feeling kind of light. I checked both of my pockets and realized I didn't have my phone. I told my friends to wait as I ran back inside to look for it. I checked the seats at the bar, at the area by the dartboard. I even asked the bartender. He hadn't seen it though. A couple of my friends came in, and I asked one of them to call my number, but quickly realizing that was kind of pointless in a loud, crowded bar. I asked the bartender to please call my number if my phone were to turn up. Sadly, I knew that was wishful thinking. We traced back to the restaurant to check the table we sat at, and I asked the staff if they had any missing phones. None. So it was safe to assume my phone was taken by someone at this point. But I still remained hopeful that maybe the bar or restaurant would call me the next day. That night, when I got home, I started cleaning myself up, getting ready for bed. For some reason, it took me that long to remember I could just use that Find My iPhone feature. I would have to sign into iCloud on my computer to use it. But when I was all signed in and everything, that little map came up on the screen. I was confused when the phone was showing up as right above my house. For a second I felt excited, like maybe I had the phone on me the whole time. I checked the pockets of the jeans I was wearing, but it wasn't there. I had no other pockets, and I knew 1000% I had my phone with me at some point in the restaurant. So how could it be at my house? Maybe someone left it at my front door. So I went outside and checked the stoop and the mailbox. It wasn't there either. Either way, it was insanely late and I was exhausted. As long as it said my phone was currently at my house, I figured I'd find it in the morning and figure out what happened. So after coming back inside the house, I did one last loop around the house, turning off all the lights and going upstairs. I sleep with the door open because I live alone. At some point, before finally climbing into bed, I heard a rattle from downstairs. It sounded like the pots and pans rack being banged into. I tiptoed downstairs. I saw that there was a light on down there somewhere. The light was leaking ever so slightly into the living room. I got to the kitchen and no one was in there, but for half a second I could see the light from my sunroom on. It turned off just as soon as I noticed it. I walked through the kitchen to the glass door that led to the adjacent sunroom. I would have to walk inside of there to turn the light on, and there was no way I was about to do that. So I just went as close to the door as possible and looked inside. I came close to screaming out loud when I could make out 2 figures standing in the darkness that was my sunroom. They were both standing nearly identically the same way, arms and legs kind of spaced out from their bodies to give an overall wider appearance to their stature. It seemed as though they had their backs to me, as I couldn't see their faces, only blackness, which I assumed was their hair. I ran to grab the kitchen phone to call 911. I reported a break-in, so the operator said there would be police arriving shortly, who would sneak up to the house, find the point of entry for the intruders, and apprehend them. The operator said the police would call me if they needed to, and asked me to hide in a closet and wait there until I heard the police downstairs. Then she told me to hang up and stay as quiet as possible. Waiting in that closet felt like it was taking centuries, mostly because of the tension of waiting in silence and motionlessness, expecting and dreading hearing any kind of noise. And actually, I did. I heard loud clonking footsteps coming from downstairs. They were coming up the stairs. They got louder and closer. Pretty soon they were near to the outside of the bedroom, but I never heard them enter the bedroom. I heard doors opening, doors to every room upstairs, until finally the door to the bedroom I was in opened. I balled up as little as possible in the corner of the closet, tucked under a blanket to hide myself. The closet door opened, and I felt my heart in my throat at this point. I did my best not to move, even though I felt my life flashing before my eyes. The door to the closet shut, and I heard footsteps leaving the room. Then I heard 2 pairs of footsteps go downstairs. I felt it was finally safe to move and breathe. After a few minutes of silence, the next sounds I heard were the voices of police officers yelling downstairs. I jumped out from the closet and rushed down to them. They entered through the sunroom actually, apparently the same way the intruders did. There were a total of 4 police officers in my house. The 2 intruders seemed to be gone, which was no surprise, one of the officers said. Usually the intruders would be out of the house before the cops arrive. So one of them had a notepad in hand and was taking down notes for my description of the whole night. They even took down the specific details of my phone and reported it as a lost item to somehow help with the case. After that, the cops left, but assured me there would be a car patrolling the area all night. The next day, I found my phone left on the kitchen counter. I figured they must have left it to avoid being tracked any further, because it was useless to them. My 2 friends joked around that the 2 intruders were simply trying to return my phone and that I should find them and thank them. Nothing has happened since, but it's hardly been a month, so I'm still kind of uneasy about sleeping in this house. There was this one weekend that my aunt, uncle, and cousins went away upstate, and instead of taking their dog with them or to a kennel, they asked me to watch her for the weekend at their house. I was excited to do so because not only would they pay me, but they are loaded and their house is full of fun stuff to do. They have a Havanese, which is a tiny dog. Her name is Luna. I didn't mind watching Luna because she was such a calm, low-maintenance dog. I just fed her twice a day and let her out back a couple times a day. She always followed me whatever room I was in, so if I was in the giant living room watching TV, she'd be laying on the floor in the center of the room. If I went downstairs to the basement to play video games, she followed and would lay down there. While playing video games in the basement, Luna suddenly lifted her head from the ground and stared in the direction of the boiler room. I had a dog before, and I knew this was something dogs did to any slight sound, but it was still enough of a reason for me to pause the game and feel a little unsettled. I looked in the direction of the boiler room as well. It was silent and dark in there, and there was no chance of me going in there. So I unpaused the game and continued playing, albeit a bit uncomfortable now. I guess my childish fears were getting the better of me. She put her head back down for a minute, but then, again, lifted it up and looked towards the boiler room. Deep down I knew it was probably nothing, but I was still a bit too freaked out to continue playing video games comfortably. So I turned everything off and ran up the stairs, shutting the door once Luna came hopping up. They also had another big gaming room on the main floor. It was kind of disconnected from the rest of the house in that you had to go through a narrow hallway to get there. Luna plopped herself down in front of my feet in this little game room. I played more video games for a while until it got late. Then I went down the hall to the room I'd be sleeping in, a guest bedroom that was nicer than my bedroom back at home. I threw on a pair of sweatpants and a white undershirt as pajamas and jumped under the covers, not going to sleep without watching a little TV first. Luna was obviously by the bedside. She was really growing on me, how affectionate yet calm she was. I eventually turned off the TV and went to sleep. My sleep was disturbed by a growling sound. I turned on the bedside lamp and saw Luna laying still on the floor, head down, yet growling at something. I said her name a few times, but she didn't look at me. Then she lifted her head finally to look at the closet door. Her growling grew more intense, and she stood up now, still looking at the closet. She didn't bark though. In fact, I never heard her bark once. I looked at the closet, a sliding wooden door closet. It was open about 3 inches from the left side. Of course, I couldn't really see anything from the inside. I got up from the bed really sneaky-like and tiptoed closer to the closet. I don't know what I was planning on doing really. I guess I just wanted to look through the crack, or see if I could hear something. When I got about 5 feet away from the closet door, something that I couldn't see from my bed came into view through the crack of the door. And I couldn't see any face or anything, it was too dark. But I knew what I was looking at in that closet was a person's eye, perfectly tucked between the wall and the edge of the door, looking into the room, or now at me. I screamed, but it didn't do much good since I was alone. I took Luna and ran for the front door, grabbing the emergency cell phone on the counter to call 911 during my run away from the house. It was 1 in the morning, so I didn't bother calling my aunt and uncle. The cops did a thorough sweep and found someone in the pantry closet downstairs. I never saw him though, because another officer was preoccupying me with conversation to calm me down. I was just relieved to go back inside, knowing I was the only one in the house, besides Luna of course, who just might have saved my life that night. A cold December in Vermont countryside. Home alone for the night, watching my friend's dog Chester, doing him a favor. Even though it was unbearably cold outside, I couldn't let his dog out in the yard. We don't have fences up here, so he could easily run into the woods and get lost. That meant, unfortunately, I had to take him for a walk in the cold. My friend gave me an old, dirty, blue tearing leash to use. Chester seemed excited when I hooked up the leash ring onto his collar ring, and he instantly pulled me towards the front door. I could already tell he'd be a pain in the ass to walk. Stepping out into the cold was a major shock to my body. I just wanted to get through this walk as soon as possible. I ran a little bit with Chester just to warm myself up. He stopped us to sniff one of the countless trees on the side of the dirt road. I thought for sure he'd do his business, but then he perked up and stared off into the woods. Then his deep, loud bark started echoing through the woods as he tugged and tried to pull me into the woods. I tried my hardest to hold him back, but the leash snapped at a weak point, and off Chester went into the woods, disappearing in seconds. His barking faded away into the woods until I couldn't hear it anymore. I chased after him, screaming his name. He probably ran off chasing a deer or a small animal or something, but with only the light of my phone, I knew I wouldn't be able to find him. He would have to come back to me on his own. After a while, I stood in place and continuously called Chester's name. I heard footsteps nearby and got excited that Chester must have been coming back. But as the footsteps got louder, I realized they were much too loud, slow, and heavy to be a dog's footprints. They sounded more like a pair of feet making the noise. not 4 legs. I turned out my light, now convinced I was hearing the footsteps of a person. The footsteps seemed to be circling me. My fear was if it was intentional or not, and if I'd been seen or not. I tried my best to tiptoe back to the road. I was covering decent distance, and then the sound of the footsteps just stopped, or faded away. I don't remember noticing which one. But because of this, I was more laxed with my footsteps and walked a little faster. Little did I realize that the black object I was walking towards was a person's back. I stopped, as it felt like my heart did too. I was covering my mouth, trying not to make a sound, but it was obviously too late. The person definitely heard my footsteps. At this point, I took a chance and asked if they had by some chance seen my dog. But they didn't even turn around. They had their hood on, so I couldn't even gauge what they looked like. I took another chance and put my hand on their shoulder, and once again, felt like my heart stopped. The shoulder felt hard and wooden. I walked in front of the body facing the tree and saw nothing inside of the hood. Nothing but a long stick holding it up. It was some kind of fake dummy. That meant whatever was making those footsteps was still nearby. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I just ran back to the road and then up the hill and back to the house. I never went back for Chester, and he never came back to the house. Telling my friend was the worst part. He hated me afterwards, and I expected he would, given that we weren't exactly the closest friends to begin with already. That night, though, I had a nightmare. That I was in my room, and I heard Chester's barks out in the woods. Like scared, whimpering type barks. I woke up and looked out the window to the dark woods, hoping the barks were real and I just heard them in my dream. But they weren't. It was silent. I don't know what happened to Chester. I don't know what the dummy was doing in the woods, and I don't know who was making those footsteps that night. Quite frankly, I'm not sure I want to know the answer to any of it. I was watching my neighbor's dog for a little extra money one night. She was a creepy neighbor though, not intentionally, but she was kind of old and had an antisocial vibe to her. She was obsessed with her dog, so when she was apparently visiting family or something across the state and couldn't bring the dog, she practically begged me to watch her. But when I agreed for the right price, she literally scolded me about what to do and not to do as far as taking care of her. The dog's name was Hazel. There was a lot of pressure put on me for watching this dog. She insisted I stay at her place instead of taking the dog next door to our place. She had a spare bedroom with a single twin-sized bed and a desk in the corner. That was all that was in the room. The dog was small, white, and puffy. I don't exactly know what kind, maybe a Bichon Frise. It was loud, yappy, and annoying though, and I hated it. I started watching it around 5, and just played on my phone for hours, only feeding the dog once that night. Thankfully, I'd only be doing this for one night. I brought over my Xbox to play games on her TV, but then I realized the TV was so archaic it didn't even have an HDMI port, so I couldn't even hook it up. So I spent most of the day playing games on my phone and listening to Hazel's yapping at every little thing. I did do a little snooping around, of course. I looked into the woman's bedroom since the door was left open, even though she told me not to go in there. The furniture was all archaic in there as well, and there was a big rectangular rug in the middle of the room, with Indian-looking patterns. When night came, I went to bed as early as possible, like 9 o'clock. I'm sure Hazel was sleeping in the woman's room. I didn't really care. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of Hazel's constant barking. I screamed, "Shut up," but the barking seemed kind of muffled in sound, like it was coming from a basement or something. but I wasn't aware of a basement in the house. I walked to where I heard the barking coming from. I was confused to realize it was coming from the woman's bedroom. I walked inside and saw the rug in the middle of the room had been rolled up to the corner, exposing a door in the grounds, opened up. It was pitch black down there, but Hazel's barking was definitely coming from down there. I was scared shitless. Obviously Hazel didn't open this door, and she was barking at something down there. I didn't want to shine a light down there in fear of what I was going to see. I was about to leave the house and run home, but I couldn't just leave Hazel down there. I whispered her name, and then the barking stopped. I was hoping to see her running up the stairs from the dark abyss any moment, but she didn't. Something did come out of the darkness, though. It was a hand grabbing onto the side of the opening. The hand of a man. I was faced with a fight or flight scenario, and being the little 15-year-old I was, I chose to run for it. I woke my parents and screamed at them what just happened. My dad called the police and reported a break-in next door. The police checked the woman's bedroom as I described. The rug was apparently back in place and the door was shut. They still went to check it out, and apparently found a big crawl space type area with a bunch of weird things laying around. No sign of a person or Hazel. When the neighbor returned home the next day, my dad confronted her for me. Apparently she threw a huge tantrum and mentioned something about the demons making noises below her at night. Then she exploded into tears over her dog. Ever since that day, we haven't spoken a single word to her. We hardly ever see her anyway. She never leaves her house. I'm okay with that. It still terrifies me to think of that night, though.
This story happened like 10 years ago. I grew up in a smallish house. For the majority of my childhood, I shared a bedroom with my older brother, 2 twin beds on opposite sides of the room, 2 dressers and 2 closets. We didn't even have enough room for a desk. It wasn't cramped, but it wasn't exactly comfortable either. So when my brother went away to college, I immediately moved his bed out of the room and commandeered the space, so to speak. With his permission, of course. I was finally at the age where a bedroom desk was a necessity, so it was nice not having to do homework in the basement or upstairs in my dad's office. That arrangement worked seamlessly for the 2 years before I myself went off to college, at which point I wasn't living at home anymore, so it didn't matter. After graduating, my brother got a city job in our hometown area, so we ended up moving back into my parents' house. And the first thing he does? You guessed it. Re-sees our bedroom that I had spent months of expended effort redesigning. I was a little irritated at first, but my parents contextualized it by saying I had basically done the same thing to him, so it was only fair. I couldn't argue with that, so I just accepted it. By the time I graduated, I had also found a city job, so I opted to move back into my parents' house, just like my brother had. Unfortunately, I didn't have a room anymore, so I'd have to make other arrangements. The only other unused room in the house was our upstairs guest bedroom, so even though it was half the size of my old room, it would have to do the trick. The guest room was right next to my dad's office, which was the only other room on that floor. It was also directly above the garage, which meant every time someone clicked the garage door button, the whole floor would vibrate for the full 10 seconds it took the door to open. The room kind of overhangs the house slightly since it's on the corner, so there were 2 windows on intersecting walls, one overlooking the driveway and one overlooking one of the sides of the house. It wasn't ideal, but it was private and quiet most of the time. This particular incident happened on a Friday evening when I was home alone. My brother was in Baltimore for some work-related conference, and my parents were spending the night at our family shore house like they did most summer weekends. I was coming off an absolutely grueling day at work, so I decided not to go out with any of my friends or even leave the house. I just wanted to order some food and call it an early night. It was around 11:30, and I was lying in bed reading a book, trying to unwind from the day. The house was completely quiet, which was kind of nice since it's usually pretty chaotic when everyone's home. That's when I heard the unmistakable sound of the garage door starting to rise, followed by that all too familiar vibrating of the floor that I'd gotten used to over the past few months. It took a few seconds for it to really hit me. None of my family members should have been home. My parents had specifically said that they were staying at the shore house until Sunday night, and my brother wasn't supposed to be back until Saturday afternoon. It took several seconds for that realization to fully sink in, but when it did, my heart started racing. I immediately jumped out of bed and looked out the window toward the driveway, but it was too dark to make out anything clearly. I could see that the garage door was open, but I couldn't tell if there was a car inside or who might have opened it. Without another thought, I rummaged through the closet until I found one of the baseball bats my parents had thrown in there for my younger days. As I was quietly walking down the stairs, I tried convincing myself that there was a logical explanation for the garage door opening. Maybe my parents had forgotten something and driven back. Maybe my brother's plans changed. Hell, maybe the door had glitched and opened on its own. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, right before turning the corner toward the main part of the house, I could hear faint voices. The voices were definitely coming from the other side of the house, where all the bedrooms were. They were too quiet for me to make out what they were saying, but I could tell that there were at least two people talking. That's when I knew for certain that someone had broken into our house. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, whispering my address and telling the operator that my house was currently being burglarized. I left the call live and put the phone back in my pocket like they tell you to. The operator told me to stay put and not to announce my presence, but I felt this overwhelming urge to defend my house. It was like I was being compelled by some invisible force to do something rather than just hide and wait. So against the operator's instruction, I decided that's exactly what I was going to do. I crept down the hallway toward the voices, clutching the baseball bat as tightly as I could. As I got closer to my parents' bedroom, I could hear the sounds of drawers being opened and things being moved around. They were clearly searching for something valuable. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to do was probably stupid, but unable to stop myself. I started yelling as loudly as I could to catch them off guard, then charged into the room with the baseball bat raised above my head. There were two men rummaging through my mother's closet, and they both yelled out in shock when I burst through the door. I could tell they hadn't expected anyone to be home, let alone someone willing to fight back. That gave me confidence, despite the fact that I was outnumbered and they could have easily had weapons of their own. I swung the bat at the closer of the two men, connecting with his leg. He cursed and hobbled a few steps before falling over. I turned to the other one, but before I could get a clean swing at him, he dropped his shoulder and tackled me before I could react. The two of us hit the ground hard, and I immediately realized that this guy was significantly larger and stronger than me. He wrestled the bat out of my hands without much effort, then got his hands around my throat and started choking me. I was fighting for my life, clawing at his hands and trying to get him off of me, when I saw the first guy crawling towards us. He had something in his hand that looked like a knife, and in that moment, I realized I'd made a grave mistake by trying to play hero, a mistake that was going to cost me my life. I genuinely thought those might be the final moments of my life. I started accepting that I was going to die in my parents' bedroom, and all I could think about was how devastated my mom would be when she found out. But then, in the background, I heard the faint sound of police sirens approaching. The last thing I remember is the second guy picking up my baseball bat and swinging it at my head. Everything went black after that. When I woke up, someone was shaking me gently. I opened my eyes to see a police officer kneeling beside me, asking if I was okay. I was dazed and confused, and it took me several seconds to remember what had happened. I looked around the room and saw that the door connecting my parents' bedroom to the backyard was wide open. The intruders had clearly knocked me out and fled through the back when they heard the sirens. The officer told me to stay put and not to move too much in case I was concussed or had other injuries. I had a raging headache, but I was conscious and coherent, which seemed like a good sign. Once the paramedics confirmed that I was okay, I refused to go to the hospital despite their recommendations. I gave the officers a detailed account of what happened. They told me they were currently searching the neighborhood for suspects, but by the time they'd arrived, the men were already long gone. After the police finished their investigation and took some photos of the scene, I called my parents and brother to let them know what had happened. My parents yelled at me pretty harshly for being stupid enough to confront those guys, and I deserved it. Had I just done the smart thing and hid, there's a good chance the police would have been able to apprehend the perps. The men were never found, despite the police canvassing the neighborhood and following up on a few leads. My parents installed a comprehensive security system the moment they got back from the shore house, complete with cameras, motion sensors, lights, the whole nine. The days after the break-in, something kept bothering me about the whole situation. All the doors to my house were locked that night, and the only way to open the garage door was through a little button in my car that my dad had programmed to be a wireless switch. There was no way anyone would just stumble upon it. Whoever had broken in that night had known me or my family well enough to know where that button was. Up until that moment, I never locked my car when it was in the driveway either, so that's something the culprits would have had to know as well. Even more concerning was the timing. They somehow knew that my parents would be away for the weekend, that my brother was out of town. I don't live in that house anymore, but my parents were never able to determine who had broken in. It was actually something that made my dad really paranoid for a long time, since he too thought that whoever had broken in was close to the family in some way. I'm not going to go as far as to say that night changed me forever or anything cliche like that, but I will say one thing. Life before and after you've accepted you're going to die are two very different things. I can still remember that feeling of thinking it was the end for me. It just felt so dissociating. Nothing can replicate that feeling. This happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still shaken up by how calculated and personal the whole thing was. I had recently moved back to my hometown to help care for my aging mother, who lives about 20 minutes away from me. I found this small duplex that was perfect for my situation, close enough to get to her quickly if needed, but far enough that I still had my own space and independence. My mom has been having some health issues lately. Nothing life-threatening, but she's had a few minor falls around the house, and she's stubborn about accepting help. I'd been trying to convince her to get one of those medical alert systems, but she insists she doesn't need one and that I'm just being overprotective. It's been a constant source of stress for me, especially knowing that she's alone most of the time. On this particular evening, I was just settling in for the night. It was around 9 p.m., and I was on the couch watching TV when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number that I didn't recognize, but since I was still relatively new to the area, I figured it might be important and answered. The woman on the other end identified herself as a nurse at a local emergency room. She said my mother had been brought in about an hour ago after taking a fall and hitting her head. According to her, my mom was conscious but asking for me, and they wanted to know if I could get to the hospital quickly. I was horrified. This was exactly the kind of call I'd been dreading since moving back. I didn't doubt the legitimacy of the call for 1 second. The woman on the other end knew my mother's full name, her address, and even mentioned her recent hip replacement surgery from a few months ago. I immediately stopped what I was doing, trying to keep calm and level myself by saying a silent prayer. I didn't even think about locking up the house. I just grabbed my keys, pulled the front door shut behind me, and raced to my car. The drive to the hospital was a nightmare. I kept running through scenarios in my head, and only a few of them were remotely good. When I got to the ER, I rushed up to the reception desk and told them I was there for my mother. I gave them her name and said I'd received a call about her fall. The nurse looked confused and checked her computer, then told me there was no record of anyone by that name being admitted or treated that evening. I insisted there had to be some mistake, since I had just gotten a call from someone claiming to be a nurse there. The receptionist was sympathetic but firm. They had no record of my mother being brought in, and they suggested I try calling her directly to make sure she was okay. So that's what I did. I stepped outside and called my mom's landline, and she answered. She said she'd been sleeping and wanted to know why I was calling so late. I didn't want to scare her, so I just said I was checking up on her and told her to go back to bed, and that's when the heart-sinking realization hit me. This had been a setup. Someone had deliberately given me false information to get me out of my house. I jumped back in my car, furious that I'd been tricked so easily. When I pulled into my driveway, the front door was still closed just like I'd left it. For a moment, I thought maybe I was being paranoid and nothing had happened, but the moment I stepped inside, I knew I'd been robbed. The house had been completely ransacked. My TV was gone, along with my laptop and small jewelry collection I kept in my bedroom. But as I looked around more carefully, I realized the thieves had taken some really strange things too. Family photos had been removed from their frames. Not the frames themselves, just the actual photos. My prescription bottles from the bathroom medicine cabinet had been emptied and taken. It was insane. They had taken things that had relatively little monetary value, yet huge sentimental value to me. It was sadistic, I'm telling you. There's no reason a thief would ever take family photos. There just isn't. I called the police immediately, but I was already feeling defeated at that point. Deep down, I knew the thieves were long gone, and there was nothing I could do about it. I told the police everything. I remembered the phone call verbatim, and after hearing it, the police reached the same conclusion I had. Whoever had been on the other end had known things about my mother and I that no stranger could possibly know. For the life of me, I couldn't even come up with a list of people who would have that information, or even ways that someone could have gotten that information in the first place. The officers told me to feel free to call back whenever I had something concrete. Then they left. I was utterly baffled. Just imagine how unsettled you'd feel if some stranger knew enough about you to lure you out of your house. The theft itself was bad enough, but the fact that they targeted family photos and medical information suggested it wasn't just about quick cash. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something longer term, possibly identity theft or some other scheme that required personal documentation. But over the next few weeks, nothing else happened. Even though my mother, quote, can't remember who she might have talked to about her personal info, I'm pretty confident that she's the source of the leak. She surprisingly has a lot of friends for a woman her age, and knowing her, she probably said too much to the wrong person. I've warned my mother about that very thing, and she's finally agreed to be more careful about who she gives personal information to, but I can't shake the feeling that we're still being watched by someone who knows way too much about our lives and isn't finished with whatever they're planning. Either way, I recently got a Ring camera, so hopefully that's enough of a deterrent. If anything else happens, I'll send an update. I'm a single guy in my early 30s, and I've been living alone in this rented house for over a year now. It's a nice little place in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it's comfortable and the rent is reasonable. I've gotten into a good routine here and really feel like I'd made it my home. The incident happened on a Thursday night around 11:30. I was getting ready for bed when I heard aggressive pounding on my front door. Not knocking, but actual pounding, like someone was trying to break it down. I looked out the window, but couldn't see much because of how poorly the porch light is positioned. Despite not being able to see who it was and the aggressiveness of the knocking, I'm a pretty buff guy, so I wasn't scared or anything, more so irritated and confused. I opened the front door, careful to keep the screen door shut as an added layer of protection. I'm not sure what I was expecting to see, but what I did see was surprising to say the least. There was this extremely agitated man standing there. He looked to be maybe a few years older than me. He was average height, had disheveled hair, and was wearing clothes that looked like they had been slept in multiple nights in a row. But what really caught my attention was how angry and unstable he seemed. His eyes were darting around, and he was breathing heavily like he'd been running or was having some kind of panic attack. He was also pacing around, like he couldn't keep his feet on the ground. Before I could even ask what he wanted, he started yelling that this was his house and demanding that I let him in. He said I was trespassing and that he was going to call the police if I didn't get out immediately. I thought he was either on drugs or having some kind of mental health crisis, or maybe a combination of the two. I tried to calm him down and explain that he had the wrong house, but he became even more agitated. That's when he started rattling off details about the house that made me freeze up. I don't even remember everything he said, but he knew several things about the house that you couldn't observe from outside it, details that only someone who had actually lived there would know. Like, for example, he knew that the door for the master bedroom is poorly designed and bangs into the toilet. He knew that the back door sticks and you have to lift it slightly while turning the doorknob. There was some other stuff too, but I really can't remember it all. I don't think I even said anything while he was talking. I was just standing there in shock. But that was only the beginning. It was about to get much, much weirder. Through the screen door, he pulled out a folder and started showing me documentation. He had what appeared to be a lease agreement with his name on it, dated from about 6 months before I'd moved in. He had pieces of mail addressed to him at this address. Everything looked official, though I suspected it had been forged somehow. But the most unsettling part was when he pulled out his phone and started showing me photos. They were literal pictures of him inside my house, sitting on my current couch watching TV, cooking in the kitchen, even lying down in what was now my bedroom. The photos looked recent and completely legitimate. They weren't obviously photoshopped or staged, and most of them weren't solo. They had other people in them, all of whom I'd never seen before. He showed me one photo that he claimed was from this past 4th of July, just a few months ago. It was a selfie taken by a woman I didn't recognize. In it, the woman, him, and a few other people were facing the camera and smiling at the kitchen table. There was a box of fireworks off to the side, and the detail and context of the picture made it look completely authentic. That's when I genuinely started questioning my own memory and sanity. How could this person have all this evidence if they never lived here? I started wondering if I somehow blocked out memories of sharing the house with someone, and if I was the one having some kind of psychological breakdown. It was freaky, especially since I knew for a fact that I had been home on the 4th of July, so the pictures made even less sense. The whole situation was so surreal that I told them I was going to call the police to sort everything out. Not even in an antagonistic way, I just didn't know what else to do. I figured they could check the records and determine what was going on. But the moment I mentioned calling the cops, the guy's demeanor changed completely. He suddenly became very calm and said he'd wait outside while I made the call. Then he just walked away from the door and disappeared into the darkness. I watched from the window, but I couldn't see where he went. When the police arrived about 10 minutes later, I explained the whole bizarre situation. They told me I should try reaching out to my landlord to get in contact with the previous tenants, and that I might get some answers that way. I had all the required documentation proving I was renting this house, but when I offered to show it to them, they waved it off. They said whoever had been on my doorstep was probably just going through a mental episode, and as long as they were gone, I should just carry on with my life. Then they left. I wasn't just going to sit there and be satisfied with that, though. Whether or not that guy had left still left the question of how in the world he had all that evidence. With my landlord's help, I was eventually able to get in contact with the previous tenants. I should mention that my landlord had no idea what had happened either, and said he didn't know anyone matching that guy's description, and had never rented to anyone like that. But anyway, the old tenants also had no idea who I was talking about. They said they'd never lived with anyone matching his description, and they lived in the house alone for 3 years before moving out. They were just as confused as I was about how this stranger could have such detailed knowledge of the house, and apparently legitimate photos of himself inside of it. For the next 2 weeks, I was constantly on edge, but nothing happened, and I started to think that maybe it had just been some elaborate scam that had failed. But of course, that turned out to be mostly wishful thinking. One night, I came home from a night on the town with my friends to find my house completely ransacked. It wasn't like a typical burglary where someone grabs obvious valuables and runs. The place was completely turned upside down, like someone had been looking for something specific. What that thing was, I had no idea. The craziest part is that most of my electronics and other valuable items were still there, despite the fact that the rooms they were in were completely trashed. The police found no signs of forced entry, which suggested that whoever did it had a copy of my key. Given the timing and connection to the strange incident 2 weeks earlier, it seemed obvious that the same person was responsible. The police took things more seriously after that, and so did my landlord. He replaced all the locks in the house immediately and free of charge, and also installed additional security measures. The going theory, and the one I believe, is that some crazy person really does believe he lives in my house and broke in to look for his personal belongings or something. And okay, sure, that's problematic enough on its own, but that does absolutely nothing to explain how he had all that documentation, let alone literal copies of my house key. I wish I had the sense to take a closer look at that so-called lease agreement he had shown me, because I might have been able to get his name. But in the moment, I just wasn't thinking clearly. The documents don't even bother me that much. All that stuff could have been easily forged or altered, including the alleged pieces of mail. What freaks me out to my core, though, are the pictures. I have no explanation for any of that stuff. It's possible they're really old pictures whose dates are doctored, but even if that's the case, it still doesn't explain how my landlord, who's owned that house his entire life, didn't recognize him. One of my friends suggested that I'm up against something not fully natural. I don't believe in that kind of stuff, but I will say that I've had this constant creepy feeling hanging over me whenever I'm in my own home, which is most of the time. I can't even begin to rationalize the whole thing. I just hope that's the end of it. I've always enjoyed late night walks. There's something about the stillness that makes everything feel simpler. I'm a welder by trade, been doing it for over 40 years now. I live alone on a big farm, just me and my dog Bosley. The house is too large for one person, but I never had the heart to downsize after my wife Maria passed away. My kids moved out years ago, and ever since cancer took her, it's just been me and Bosley. One night, after a long day in the shop, I decided to go for a walk. My property is pretty big, so just a single loop is usually enough to satisfy my craving. The air was cool, and Bosley trotted along beside me. Sometimes I think he likes me more than I like him. I've walked that loop hundreds of times, but as I was heading back toward the house, something caught my eye. I glanced up at the second-story window, the one that looks out from the bedroom Maria and I used to share. For a split second, I thought I saw something move. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring up at that window. There was no reason anyone should be in there. I hadn't been in that room in years, couldn't bring myself to. I felt my blood start to boil at the thought of some stranger breaking into my house. I wasn't going to stand for that. I rushed inside, my heart racing, and ran upstairs. The room was empty, just like I'd left it. No sign of anything out of place. I looked everywhere imaginable, but found nothing. Yes, I was pretty freaked out, but I was more angry than anything. I didn't take this kind of thing lightly. I figured I had just seen something that wasn't there. I stood there for a while, feeling foolish, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. The next night, I woke up to Bosley growling. He's a good dog, never barks unless there's something to bark at. I sat up in my bed, listening. That's when I heard creaking coming from upstairs. It could have just been the sounds of my old house, but my mind went directly to footsteps, which were coming from right above me. I'm sure you could guess which room is directly above mine. I debated grabbing my hunting rifle from downstairs, but didn't want to go that far. If it came down to it, I was fully confident that I could take whatever was up there hand to hand. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check. Again, nothing. The room was exactly the same, untouched. My anger was definitely starting to turn into anxiety at this point. Something didn't feel right in the house. The following night, I came downstairs to find the kitchen lights on. I know I turned them off before bed. I don't leave lights on. There was no question anymore. Someone was in my house. I started to panic. I called the police and told them I thought someone might be sneaking around. They came out, searched the house from top to bottom, but found nothing. They were nice about it. Told me to call again if I needed them, but I could tell they didn't believe me. The next night was the worst by far. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to go upstairs and check the bedroom again. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it would settle my mind. But when I opened the door, I froze. There were clothes scattered all over the floor. Maria's clothes. I had packed them away after she died. Now they were everywhere. Something like this doesn't just happen randomly. And then I saw her. There was a woman standing in the doorway, just staring at me. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I could tell she wasn't Maria. She was too short. I don't know who she was, but she didn't belong there. I had never been so afraid in my life. Without thinking, I ran at her. She turned and bolted down the stairs and out the front door. By the time I got outside, she was gone. I searched the property with Bosley, but there was no trace of her. I didn't sleep that night. For months after that, I couldn't sleep. I was constantly on edge, convinced I heard footsteps upstairs at night. Every little noise set me off. I slept with my rifle next to my bed, terrified that I'd have to use it one night. Every little noise set me off. I debated calling my brother to come stay with me, but I wasn't going to do that. I was raised to always handle my own shit, so that's what I did. The nightmare didn't end, though. One night, I was sitting in the living room when I noticed a figure standing in the yard, looking straight at me through the window. It was her again. My heart felt like it stopped. I grabbed my hunting rifle and ran outside, Bosley close behind. She was still there, just a silhouette in the moonlight, watching me. I fired a few warning shots into the air, hoping to scare her off. That was enough to get her to turn and run into the darkness, but it's not like that made me feel any better. I was literally being tormented by some random woman who was probably homeless. I couldn't even imagine why this was happening to me. I stood there for a long time, waiting to see if she'd come back. She never did. I haven't seen her since, but I know it's only a matter of time. I'm fully prepared to defend myself, but I don't think living in perpetual anxiety like this is sustainable. Thank God for Bosley. I have no idea what I'd do without him. I'll send an update if anything happens. I work for a catering service, which means I'm on the road a lot, usually late at night. I spend most of my time lugging stuff from place to place in this massive truck the company makes me drive. It's not the worst job in the world, but the hours suck, and it's not at all what I thought I'd be doing with my life. By the time I get home, I'm either so wired from caffeine that I can't sleep, or I pass out the second I hit the bed and stay that way for 12 hours. I was driving back home one night at like 2 a.m. It was nice to be driving my own car again. As I was approaching my house, I realized I had probably had one too many Red Bulls and there was no way I'd be able to sleep. On top of that, I hadn't eaten in hours and I was starving. There's a McDonald's right off the highway about 10 minutes from my house. It's usually my first choice when it comes to late night snacks since it's just so convenient. I'm not even one to gorge myself on fast food. I just occasionally get this weird craving that only a handful of fries can satisfy. It's obviously 24/7, and I figured some comfort food would be the perfect thing to help me wind down. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it was definitely after 2 by the time I pulled into the drive-thru. There were a few cars ahead of me, which I was actually kind of surprised by. It's not like this McDonald's was a busy spot at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. As I was sitting there impatiently, I found myself staring off into space, wondering what was taking so long. That's when I noticed something strange. There was an old, beat-up Volkswagen with its windows tinted backed into a spot in the very corner of the lot. The McDonald's itself was only accepting drive-thru orders at this hour, so it did make sense why there'd be a car in the lot. There were reserved spots on the other side for employees, so it couldn't have been one of them. I figured it was maybe just someone eating in their car, which it probably was. I myself did that from time to time, so I guess I couldn't judge. It was just an odd sight, to be completely honest. I got my food and started driving away. I didn't want to go home just yet, but I also didn't want to just sit there idling my car. I began racking my brain, trying to think of a good place to scarf down the food. I live in a pretty lush area, so there's honestly a lot of options, but I didn't want to beat around the bush too much considering how late it was. There's a massive nature preserve literally down the street from my house. It's situated on a mountain and is essentially just an enormous forest. The kicker is that there's a scenic lookout point at the peak with a view of the city. There's a road that loops around the perimeter of the preserve and will take you right to the peak, which is nice during the day. After the preserve closes, though, the road is inaccessible to cars, but still a convenient path to get to the peak without having to walk through any woods. I used to go there with my friends from high school all the time. It was kind of a default spot when we wanted to be outside. We'd hang out, talk, smoke, or just appreciate the view. I actually hadn't been there in a while because I was just so busy working all the time, so I figured going there would deliver a much-needed nostalgia rush. When I got to the preserve parking area, it was completely empty. I say parking area because it wasn't a traditional parking lot with spaces for cars, but rather a big patch of gravel that veered off from one of the roads that ran past the preserve's border. Like I said, the actual preserve was closed, meaning I'd have to walk all the way up to the lookout spot from outside. Before I could even turn off the engine, I saw headlights pulling into the lot. That was unsettling enough on its own. Who else would be here at 2 a.m.? And then I realized what I was looking at. It was that same Volkswagen from the McDonald's parking lot. I was 100% certain of it. I parked a little ways away, and the engine cut off. I felt the unease start to pour in. What were the odds of that happening naturally? Had they followed me? My window was partially rolled down, and as far as I could tell, there was no music coming from that car, or at least none that I could hear. After nothing happened for a good minute or so, my fear started to fade. They were probably doing the same thing I was, out for some fresh air or a smoke. It's a pretty popular spot for that kind of thing, but I was just so weirded out considering how late it was. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, even though I concluded that it was just one of those unexplainable coincidences. I sat there for a minute, debating if I should just go home. I didn't want to leave, but I didn't want to be alone either. I picked up my phone and FaceTimed one of my close friends who lived a few minutes away. I told myself that if he didn't pick up, I'd just eat my food in the car and drive home. He was actually awake though, which I was a little surprised by. He said he had been up writing a paper. I convinced him to swing by and hang out for a bit. He was down. He said he'd be there in 10. While I waited, I kept my eyes on the Volkswagen. It still hadn't moved. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. When Sebastian finally pulled into the lot, I felt a lot better. We both got out of our cars and began walking up the path. Before the parking lot fully receded from view, I shot a glance backwards. The Volkswagen was still there, but I saw all 4 doors open at once. 4 guys stepped out. They just stood there for a few seconds looking at each other. They weren't even talking, just looking around at each other. It was freaky. I nudged Sebastian, who realized what I was looking at. Before they could see us, we continued walking up the path so that the lot was obstructed from view. Alarm bells were going off in my head, but Sebastian didn't seem that concerned. He told me they were probably just going out to smoke. We kept walking, and by the time we got to the top, the city view was enough to take my mind off things. We always sat on this little rock wall that was supposed to keep people from wandering off the edge of the mountain. We sat there, eating and talking like we used to. It was nice. Of course, that nice feeling didn't last very long. We heard the sound of talking and laughter quickly approaching us. We turned around to see 3 guys walking towards us, sharing what looked like a blunt. They were acting friendly enough, which definitely calmed my nerves a little. Instead of finding their own spot, though, they walked right up to us like they wanted to start a conversation. The guy in the blunt was covered in tattoos and had a nose ring. He honestly looked pretty intimidating. He flashed half a smile before asking us if we wanted to smoke. We both said no, and one of the other guys laughed and called us pussies, to which Sebastian scoffed at. My curiosity got the better of me, and I blurted out a question about what they were doing at McDonald's. The guy holding the blunt dropped his smile instantly and narrowed his eyes, like he was caught off guard by my question. His 2 friends did the same, staring at us with cold expressions. They didn't say anything for an uncomfortably long time. That's when I remembered that there had been 4 guys in that car, not 3. One of them was missing. At that point, I was fully prepared to run. I knew Sebastian was thinking the same thing. Finally, the ringleader told us that he worked nights and that he had just gotten off. He pulled his hoodie up to reveal a McDonald's uniform, I think because he knew we wouldn't have believed him otherwise. He then went on to say he came to the spot every day after work to smoke with his friends. While that definitely calmed me down a bit, something about this situation was terribly off. I could tell Sebastian felt the same. We decided it was time to go. As we started walking down the path, Sebastian stopped and pointed into the trees. I followed his gaze and saw the 4th guy, half hidden in the darkness. He was holding something, but I couldn't make out what it was. I felt my heart start racing. The moment he saw us looking, he started moving. That's when we ran. We bolted down the path, glancing back to see him chasing us with the 3 other guys close behind. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I could hear their footsteps getting closer, but I didn't look back again. We finally made it to the parking lot, jumped into our cars, and floored it out of there. As I was speeding away, I could see those guys rushing to get in their car. I didn't feel comfortable driving home out of fear that I'd be leading them right to my house. I called Sebastian and told him we should meet back up on his street. We had a decent head start on them, and I don't think we were followed, but I wasn't taking any chances. When Sebastian and I met back up, we were still in shock about what the hell just happened. I don't know if they were trying to rob us or worse. I didn't know what to think. Sebastian showed me his phone and said he had snuck a picture of them while they weren't looking. He sent it to me, but I wasn't sure what to even do with it. I had off the next day, so I convinced Sebastian to come with me back to the McDonald's so we could at least report the employee. The next day, we approached a guy on the younger side in hopes that he'd listen to us. We showed him the picture and told him what happened, and his eyes widened. He told us something literally out of a horror movie. Apparently, that guy's girlfriend had also worked at that same McDonald's and had dumped him a few months ago. He didn't take it well and would harass her while she was working and stalk her after her shifts. He obviously got fired, but that didn't help. The police were involved shortly after, and there was a restraining order put in place. Apparently, he had been violating that restraining order because he was camping out in the parking lot. Sebastian and I were horrified. I have no idea why he'd decide to follow me, but it was clear that he was unhinged. I'm praying that the police catch him camping out in the parking lot, because then he'll actually be screwed. I just hope he doesn't recognize my car anywhere. It's only been a week, but I haven't been back to that McDonald's or the preserves since. Hopefully the police are able to do something, but that's out of my control. Forgive me if I don't remember every detail of the story. It happened a while ago. I grew up in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. Not much goes on around here, so finding things to do can be a challenge. In high school, a few friends and I would sneak into and explore old, abandoned buildings. That's the sort of thing we did at that age. I didn't realize how popular that kind of stuff is until many years later. Apparently, lots of people like to explore abandoned buildings. Anyway, there was this abandoned church that we'd been to a couple of times before. It was in Narberth. I actually remember the exact address, 198 Elmwood Avenue. The place was creepy, but it was kind of our go-to spot for late-night thrills. One fall evening, a few of us decided to hit the church and drink a little inside. It was a chilly night, and the air had that crisp bite to it. There were 6 of us, me, Luna, Gina, Johnny, Max, and Allie. The church sat behind an 8-foot chain-link fence, which we had to climb to get in. The doors were all boarded up, so we always went through a window on the side. Once you were inside, the first thing you noticed was the floor, or lack of one. The entire first floor was just dirt. It looked like someone had ripped out the floorboards years ago, leaving only a hole in the center where a set of concrete stairs led down to the basement. That's where we always ended up, down in the basement. The basement had 3 rooms, but only one had a door. The other 2 just had door frames. The first room we went into was the largest. There wasn't much in it, just some old furniture, broken chairs, a busted couch. I remember having to shush Johnny like 12 times because he was a lightweight, and the tiny bit of alcohol he had was making him really loud and antsy. Being in such a big group was always a plus though, and I felt much safer knowing we had numbers. We messed around for a while, drinking and laughing like we usually did. We might have had a speaker playing music, but I don't fully remember. Out of nowhere, a door slammed. I literally jumped. That's how loud it was. We froze, staring at each other with concerned expressions. At first, I thought one of us had closed the door by accident, but no one was near it. Almost immediately, Luna, Gina, and Johnny made a break for it, sprinting up the stairs, leaving me, Max, and Allie behind. We were the fearless ones, and none of us wanted to leave just yet. My heart was definitely pounding, I fully admit that, but I wasn't going to let the wind freak me out. I could tell Max and Allie were thinking the same thing. I don't know if it was curiosity or stupidity, but we decided to investigate. After standing in silence for a few minutes, the 3 of us crept over to open the door that had slammed shut. Behind it was a small room, and the first thing I saw was a dresser. The mirror on top of it was cracked, and there were red stains smeared across the surface. At first, I thought it was old paint or something, but when I got closer, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't completely dry. The stains still had that sticky sheen to them, like whatever it was hadn't been there for long. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and I was having second thoughts about not leaving sooner. Someone, or dare I say something, had recently been in this room. Then I saw the picture. There was an old photo on top of the dresser. A black and white shot of a woman in a wedding dress. She was smiling, but there was something off about it. The whole thing gave me a bad feeling. I backed away, but just as I turned, we heard another noise. This time, it wasn't the door. It was coming from one of the other rooms. It was coming from the room we had just been in. That's when Max and Allie both decided they'd had enough. I wasn't going to argue with them. We grabbed our stuff and ran out of there as fast as we could. When we climbed back over the fence and hit the pavement, none of us said a word. After jumping the fence, I turned around, and and I could swear I saw the silhouette of a person standing in the open window. I still pray that by some minuscule chance my mind was just playing tricks on me, but I'll never know for sure. My friends and I never went back there together for as long as we remained friends. I've actually been back to that church myself, although it wasn't a church anymore. By the time I got around to checking it out again, it was completely demolished. I still have no idea what we saw that night. I'm just glad my friends were there to witness it with me. Had I been alone, I might doubt this whole thing even happened. If anyone wants to do some digging, go ahead. I was never able to find out anything online, but I wouldn't be surprised if that church has a history I don't know about. I've had 3 girlfriends in my life. My current girlfriend, who I've been with for 3 years happily, my first girlfriend in college, and my second girlfriend, Kelly. Kelly was someone who put me through hell emotionally and sometimes physically. I'll start from the beginning. Kelly and I matched on Bumble, and upon seeing that we both attended the same college, we based our conversation off that and any people that we may have mutually known. After seeing each other for about a month, we made it official, and we dated for about 6 months. Like most relationships, at first everything seemed great, and we got along fine. But the illusion of being a happy couple faded after a few months, when Kelly would start becoming very controlling and downright obsessive over knowing what I was doing at all times. The longer we dated, the more I realized she didn't have many friends at all, maybe 1 or 2, that's about it. So when I would go out to see my friends on the weekends without her, she would always obsessively text me every 15 minutes asking me for proof of where I was. If I were ever to be at a bar without her, she'd throw a fit. She'd make me share my location with her after 4 or 5 months of dating. It got to the point I couldn't handle it anymore. She had too much time on her hands to worry about what I was doing constantly. I couldn't even go see my friends without constantly being attacked and interrogated by her. But one night, things escalated far worse than they ever had. Admittedly, I ended up at a bar and very drunk with a group of my drinking buddies. We started at my friend Kevin's house, and I didn't intend on ending up at a bar. When I got home, Kelly was waiting in front of my mom's house for me, with a batshit crazy look on her face. This was one of the first nights that she laid hands on me, repeatedly hitting me while screaming I'm a dirty cheater and other insane things, all while outside causing a scene for the neighbors to hear. After I had to grab her arms to get her to stop, she shouted things like, "Get off me, I'm calling the police." So I let go and told her we're done. This was officially when I broke up with her, and her response was not good. Every single day, I received paragraphs upon paragraphs, ranging from angry to alleged regretfulness back to angry. Eventually, I felt more comfortable blocking Kelly for a while, but that wasn't the end. One of my friends who followed her on Instagram still sent me a screenshot of the picture she posted with this big, ugly, muscular guy who looked like he wanted to kill the person taking the picture. I made a joke to my friends saying, "Wow, I see she upgraded." Kelly did the unimaginable though. I was all cozy in my bed, in the perceived safety of the house. I was home alone, as I usually was living in my parents' house. That was when I heard a pounding at the front door downstairs. I jumped out of bed and went out to the living room to listen. There was a man's screams from the other side. He was screaming, "Open up, pussy." I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't want him to know I was home. Then some random number was calling my phone. When I didn't pick up, I got a text from someone threatening to kill me and telling me to open the door before he breaks the window. I ignored these and called 911. I heard glass breaking from outside. I looked out my window and I saw a familiar, huge bearded guy right by my SUV. He was smashing my windows. I recognized the guy to be from Kelly's picture. As I was on the phone with 911, I explained that my crazy ex-girlfriend sent her current boyfriend to my house to threaten me, and he was currently damaging my vehicle. I answered a bunch of questions as police were en route. All the while the man kept screaming things from outside and pounding on my door and sending threatening texts. Police showed up surprisingly quickly to my relief, and they caught the guy still in front of my house. They saw him step off the front stoop after he saw the cop car pulling up. I went outside right away and showed the police my car and the texts. And the big, roid-raging man was still yelling at me that I'm gonna fucking pay for talking shit about him to Kelly. I told him I hadn't spoken to Kelly in months, and he said, "Oh yeah, what about the texts?" as he was in handcuffs already. I said, "What texts?" And he accused me of being a bullshitter. So after he was brought away in one of 2 police cars, I gave the second police officer whatever information he needed of the situation between Kelly and I, and he told me I had a good case for harassment and should definitely file for a restraining order immediately. He told me to head to the precinct the next day, which is what I did, but I also unblocked Kelly and asked her what she said to her boyfriend and why. And after she responded claiming she had no idea what I was talking about, I sent her a long text giving her a piece of my mind, basically telling her about my getting a restraining order and telling her to seek help. I never heard from her again, nor her crazy, roid-raging, now ex-boyfriend. According to my friend, she deleted the picture with him literally the next day after that happened. I currently have a restraining order against both her and her ex-boyfriend, Javier Cruz. Be careful who you decide to date. There's a whole lot of crazy out there. I dated my ex Kian for 2 years. It was a toxic, abusive relationship. I endured a lot of physical suffering from it, but I was always too scared to leave it. I live with my single mom on a rougher side of town, the place where I spent my entire childhood. Being a girl walking home alone at night here can be sketchy, which was part of the reason why I stayed with Kian for so long. He is a big guy, and I felt a sense of protection with him, when he wasn't making me feel like shit. A big reason I stayed with him though towards the end was because I was scared of how he'd take it if I broke up with him. My mother always hated him though, and she knew he was no good for me. Unfortunately, it took me as long as it did to cut ties with him. I did it over text one day though, because I knew if I did it in person he'd hit me or go crazy. He still didn't take it well. Seconds after I texted him, he tried calling me over and over. I wouldn't pick up because I was scared. So after the 3rd or 4th attempted call, he started typing for a few minutes, and the text I got from him was a long paragraph cursing me out, a lot of it in all caps. I texted him back that we could talk about it on the phone tomorrow when he's cooled off. He of course sent another paragraph, and I didn't read this one right away because I was about to cry, and I didn't want to deal with it at that moment. My mom was working her second job that night and wouldn't be home till around 2 in the morning. I had class the next day, so I went to bed early around 10, but falling asleep was difficult with my mind racing. Eventually though, I did fall asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound from the outside of my room. I looked at the clock and it was around 1 a.m. It wasn't uncommon for me to wake up to my mom getting home late at night after work. I was just surprised because she was home rather early this night. I sat up and saw something sitting on the edge of my bed. I realized it was my cat Nala. I got out of bed and went out into the hall and called my mom's name. All the lights were out. I knew for certain I heard something from out in the living room. I turned on the living room lights, but no one was here. I went to the front door to make sure it was locked, and it was. I checked through the window to the driveway, and my mom's car wasn't here, so I figured maybe I was just hearing things. I went back to my room and shut the door, then crawled back into bed. Nala was still in the same spot on my bed. She hadn't moved. I tried to go back to sleep, and I suddenly heard another sound. I ran out to the living room again, and my mom wasn't here still. I suddenly realized Kian knew where we kept the spare key in the backyard. What if he had just let himself in? I went back to my room and called my mom on my cell phone and told her. I had already texted her earlier about my breakup, so she already knew and was proud of me. She said she'd be home in a little bit, and that I could just be hearing house noises. I laid back down in my bed. Nala was still in the same position. I turned on the lamp and went to go pick her up, but I gasped when I saw her eyes lifelessly open and she wasn't breathing. I picked her up and confirmed it. My cat was dead. I wanted to cry, but I covered my mouth. I suddenly knew that Kian was in the house and that he did this to punish me. I locked my bedroom door and called 911 and whispered into the phone that my crazy ex-boyfriend broke into my house and killed my cat. I was told to wait in the closet in my bedroom until I heard the police arrive. I stayed on the phone with 911 in the closet, waiting. At any time during this, the front door to the house could have opened and closed, and I wouldn't have been able to hear it. Eventually, the 911 operator told me the police were there. Apparently, the door was unlocked because they let themselves in. That meant Kian had probably just left. I went to the living room to find 2 police officers. I was bawling my eyes out over Nala now. The first thing they asked was, "Where is he?" And I said, "I think he left." I showed them my cat and the text from Kian. My mom came home shortly after I called her, and she cried over Nala too. The police were not very helpful at all, saying without any actual evidence that someone broke into the house, they couldn't just go and arrest someone. Nala had no stab marks or anything, so as messed up as it sounds, we couldn't even prove that she was likely murdered by Kian as revenge to me. The next day, my mom had the locks to the house changed. The spare key in the backyard was still there, but Kian easily could have put it back. I blocked Kian's number and all social media outlets. All the evidence pointed to him having done it. My mother and I went through the process of getting an order of protection against him, and the judge issued us a temporary one before our court date. The last time I ever saw Kian was in court, where thankfully the judge determined that the order of protection would remain in place. I still often think about how the first time I went downstairs, Kian was probably somewhere in the living room, hiding and watching me. When I was in junior year of high school, I had my first relationship. His name was Mike. He was a senior at a different high school the next town over. We met through Facebook. He messaged me and we started talking from there. We started hanging out and going to each other's games. I'd go to his football games, he'd come to my softball games. We officially became boyfriend-girlfriend after a few weeks. Since we were in high school though, we didn't go on a lot of traditional dates like dinner or drinks. We were just kids still. Our dates usually consisted of getting burritos, going for drives, or hanging out at his place since my parents were always home and made it awkward in case we wanted to do anything. The best way I could describe Mike, he was a bit of a hothead. He was big for a 17-year-old, that's why he played football, but he didn't hang out with the jocks. He hung out more with the stoner crowd and the regular crowd. At least that's what he told me. I didn't go to the same school as him, so I didn't see who he was with during lunch. I also didn't really meet a lot of his friends. We mostly hung out just the two of us, as opposed to group things. Since he lived kind of far though, and I couldn't drive yet, it did get annoying. And truthfully, I started to develop feelings for this boy Andrew at my own school in my grade. Around the same time, I felt myself losing interest in Mike. I wanted to test things out with Andrew, so one night when Mike was asking to hang out, I asked him to pick me up so we could talk. He knew right away something was off when I said that. When he picked me up, we went for a drive, and I told him that I think we should take a break. He refused to accept that I was serious, and angrily demanded to know what he did. When I told him it's just that I felt the spark wasn't there anymore, he got so mad that he punched his dashboard, leaving a big indent in it. He started yelling and scaring me, so I was about to get out of the car, but he stopped me and put his hand on my shoulder and said no, 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 and then asked me not to leave. He told me he's just angry, but that he'd drive me home. He put the car back in drive and started driving us. As we drove, he kept getting angrier, as he kept asking for more details of what he did wrong. He started blowing stop signs, and that's when I realized we weren't going in the direction of my parents' house. I asked him to pull over and let me out, and he yelled no. We were approaching some wooded area, and that's when I started getting really scared. I had never seen him like this before, but he was showing me a crazy side of himself. I got out of the car when he stopped it on the side of some quiet road. He yelled for me to come back, but I didn't. My mom came to pick me up. Mike sent me an apology text later that night that I didn't respond to. 2 nights later, I left my house to walk to Andrew's house, who I had plans to hang out with. He lived only 2 blocks away from me. On my way there, I spotted someone across the street, not too far behind me, walking about the same pace as me. They were wearing a hoodie with the hood up. I couldn't see their face. Foot traffic on our block wasn't too common, but it also wasn't super weird either. The closer I got to Andrew's house, the closer the person across the street got. As I continued up the street, I turned again and saw the person was now on the same side of the street as me. My heart started to race. I started walking faster. According to my phone, Andrew's house was coming up just on the right. I texted him to come outside please because I think I'm being followed. He replied back okay. I turned one more time as I heard the sound of shoes running on the sidewalk approaching from behind me, and I saw the guy in the black hoodie running at me. I screamed and ran as fast as I could for about 5 seconds, before seeing Andrew run to the front of his house in confusion. I turned around again and saw the guy in black running the opposite direction down the street. I keep saying the guy in black, but I know it was Mike. That guy had an identical height to him from what I could tell. A few instances happened after that. like getting calls with no caller ID and seeing Mike's car parked outside my parents' house in the middle of the night. My parents were aware of what was going on, and one day, my dad drove us over to Mike's house and knocked on the front door while I was in the car and had a long, loud talk with Mike's parents. I lowered the windows to listen, and most notably what my dad yelled was that he doesn't care how old Mike is, that it's still harassment, and if he keeps trying to contact me in any way, that we'd get police involved. It worked. Mike stopped trying to contact me after that. For those wondering, Andrew and I ended up dating for around a year. My relationship with Mike was an early lesson in my life to watch out for red flags. My girlfriend and I recently moved into our new house. It's honestly the home we've been dreaming of, the perfect fit for us. We have a cat named Bella whom we rescued together, so everything felt perfect when we first moved in. The only downside at first was the house to our right. It looked abandoned, as the owner had started renovating it but never finished. The layout of the houses is such that on our right there's a space for the entrance to our back garden, and next to that is the abandoned house's entrance to its back garden. There's no fence separating the two, as the owner removed it to install a new one but never completed the job, leaving both back gardens with open access. Behind the abandoned house is another property separated by a fence. From what we could see, several young men lived there. Occasionally, when we returned home, we'd see them cutting through the neighbor's back garden to reach the front of the street. We didn't think much of it at first. Maybe they knew the owner and had permission. Fast forward to our first night in the new house. We were sitting in the back garden, enjoying the space, and looked up at the houses behind us, just out of curiosity. That's when we noticed a man staring blankly at us from a window. He wasn't hiding it, he made it very obvious. There was no expression on his face, and the room was dark, which made the whole thing even more unsettling. We assumed he was just curious about his new neighbors, but after half an hour of that blank stare, we decided to go inside. The next few days were normal. I went to work, and my fiancée continued unpacking. One night, we decided to sit in the garden again. It was dark, but we enjoyed looking at the stars and having deep conversations, until we heard the makeshift wooden board fence being moved. 3 men appeared, standing there, staring at us. "Are you okay?" I asked, knowing they wouldn't leave unless I said something. The youngest looking one, around 29, was holding a big bag, and we had no idea what was inside. He offered us some stolen washing up tablets, which we declined. I made a joke about it because the situation felt so awkward. He smiled and said okay, and then they left. What struck me was how they just let themselves into our garden without saying anything, like as if they had every right to be there. We went back inside, thinking it was a one-off, but it all started getting worse from there. They began helping themselves into our garden more often and acting in ways that were clearly meant to intimidate us. They would get into the next door house by lifting up the fence that separated the back gardens and walking through. I forgot to mention, my girlfriend and I are both 20 years old, so of course the idea that they might be trying to intimidate us as 2 young women was the first thing that crossed our minds. One day, while I was cleaning the front room, 2 police officers came around the side of our house and entered the abandoned garden. They lifted up the fence and looked around for a few minutes before leaving without saying anything. I thought it was strange, but continued with my day, assuming maybe the people next door were trouble. A few days later, the police knocked on our door. They explained that the house behind us was now vacant. The men had been kicked out for antisocial behavior, apparently not just towards us, but with other neighbors too. Honestly, we were relieved. Even though they hadn't physically done anything yet, it meant they wouldn't get the chance to escalate things. We continued settling into the house, but one day, while I was in the bath, I heard a loud bang outside. I quickly got dressed and ran to find my girlfriend. I found her recording something from our spare bedroom window, which faces the garden of the now empty house. I asked what was going on, but she shushed me. After a moment, she explained. A man we had never seen before pointed up at our bedroom window, and when she noticed him, He sprinted full speed toward our house. He tried our door handle on the way past, then ran back into the garden, threw the broken fence up, and started banging on all the windows of the empty house. We called the police immediately. They came, watched the video, took a statement, and left. We were shaken. Why would they try our door handle and then break into that house? What was he planning? A few nights later, while we were in bed, we heard whistling. The kind of whistle men use to harass women. It was 2:16 a.m. We listened quietly, and then heard someone tapping on our window. Terrified, we checked the cameras, but for some reason, they didn't record anything. Whoever it was must have left shortly after because the noises stopped. We were too scared to sleep, so the next day, we went to my mom's and stayed the night. When we returned the following morning, we noticed our Ring doorbell had been removed and placed on the floor. The SD card was gone. Someone had clearly come back, and we knew who it was. Who else would do that? We called the police again, and they told us to keep all the doors and windows locked. The woman on the phone even said that the removal of the camera could be a sign that they were planning something, which terrified us even more. But at least she was honest. The whistling, banging, and attempts to re-enter the house continued for weeks. We made multiple police reports. They never tried our door again, so we hoped it was over. But 3 weeks later, while in bed watching funny clips from our camera, we checked the live feed. That's when we saw a man outside, wearing a black mask covering his mouth and nose, with his hood up, standing in front of our garden with his arms spread wide, like he was imitating Jesus on the cross. He stared up at our bedroom window with his head tilted. We froze. At the time, we had moved the camera inside the house, so it didn't record. We were so shaken we didn't even think to screen record. He then spoke, but we couldn't hear what he said. Then he turned around, walked to the opposite side of the street, and just stood there, staring at our house for about 30 minutes. We called the police again. They said it wasn't illegal to stare at someone's property and dismissed the whole thing, even when we told them what he did on our lawn. They made us feel like we were overreacting. We couldn't sleep for days. Any noise outside terrified us, even normal ones. Then, one night at 2:52 a.m., we got a notification. I woke my girlfriend and said, "Someone's outside, I know it. Please check the camera." She did, and there they were. 2 masked men coming from the side of our house, shining flashlights into our windows. One of them, the same man who had been harassing us, was holding what looked like a crowbar. Why us? What was the point of this? For days on end, he would stand across the street, pointing, waving, or shouting things up at our window. Every time we looked, he would stare blankly at us. It was clearly meant to scare us, and it worked. We kept contacting the police, but they've done very little. The harassment continues. We've got cameras now, and we record everything, but we feel powerless. Just earlier today, he stood outside again, staring up at us. We got it on video, and we're absolutely terrified, but we'll update if anything else happens. Let me preface this by saying I'm not crazy. I know how this is going to sound. Paranoid, unhinged, delusional, but I swear everything I'm about to tell you actually happened. It started with a face, or more accurately, faces that all looked just slightly off. 3 months ago, I ended a relationship with my ex Caleb. We'd been together almost 2 years, and the breakup was long overdue. Caleb wasn't violent or anything, he never hit me, but he was controlling and possessive in that low-key and calculating kind of way. Perhaps the worst kind of way. He'd do things like track when I'm on my phone and quiz me on things I'd done that day to see if I'd give the same answer twice. After I left him, I changed my number, disabled my social media, and even moved apartments. I thought I was in the clear. Then came the barista. It was a Tuesday morning. I stopped by this little hole-in-the-wall coffee shop near my new place. I'd only been there once or twice. As I stepped up to the counter, the barista, a girl about my age, smiled at me, but something about her expression made me pause. She tilted her head and said, "Good morning, sunshine." I froze because that was Caleb's nickname for me. It was not a common one. He used to say it sarcastically whenever I was upset, like, "What's wrong, sunshine?" He enjoyed pushing buttons. I brushed it off, maybe it was a coincidence, but then it happened again. A few days later, I took a rideshare to work. A different driver than usual, older guy, maybe in his 50s. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror like he was trying to recognize me, and then he asked me if I ever figured out what I was running from. He said it as casual as could be. I simply responded, "What?" And he just chuckled and shook his head like I was in on some joke. Caleb said that to me once. After I told him I needed time to figure myself out, he leaned in dead serious and asked, "Ever figure out what you're running from?" Now, 2 strangers have repeated things he said, word for word. It kept happening. A woman at the grocery store bumped into me and whispered, "You don't get to just disappear." A guy on the street said, "Still wearing your hair like that," as he passed. Another one, someone who worked in my building, said, "You always liked this song," while humming the exact tune Caleb used to play when we argued. It wasn't their faces that freaked me out, it was the way they looked at me, like they knew me, or at least thought they did. They all had different faces, but their eyes all had the same expressions. I started thinking I was going crazy. I mean, what else could explain it? So I did something I wasn't proud of. I contacted Caleb. Not directly. I sent a message to his sister. I told her to tell him to stop. I figured maybe he hired a private investigator. Maybe he was stalking me or pulling strings, telling people things about me. I just wanted it to stop. She texted back the next day, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about. Caleb's in rehab. He's been there for 6 weeks with no phone." I didn't believe her. I thought she was covering for him. That is, until I saw a picture she posted of him on Facebook a week later, looking pale and sunken in, holding one of those one-day sober chips. So it couldn't be Caleb, or at least not directly. I couldn't shake the feeling that these strangers knew things they shouldn't, though. One night, I stayed late at work. I didn't want to go home because my apartment didn't feel safe anymore. Not that anything bad happened inside of it, I just didn't like being alone. Around 10 p.m., I finally called it a night. I walked the 10 minutes to my place, keeping my head down, headphones in, but no music playing. Something I learned to do so I could still hear if someone was following me. When I turned the corner onto my block, I saw someone sitting on the stoop of the building across from mine. A young man with his hoodie up but his head down. I almost ignored him until he spoke. He said, "Cold out tonight, huh, sunshine?" I stopped walking. He didn't look at me, he just stared at the sidewalk like he was reading something on it. I slowly walked past and didn't say a word. When I reached my building, I went upstairs and locked every bolt on the door. I sat on the couch for hours, just listening to nothing. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to find my doormat flipped over. That might not sound like a big deal, but I live alone, and the door to my unit is on the top floor. You don't just accidentally walk by my place. The underside of my mat had something scribbled in pen. It said, "You can change your face too if you want, but I'll still recognize you." I didn't know what it meant, but I still threw up. That day, I booked a hotel for the weekend. I left my apartment without packing anything. I didn't feel safe even grabbing clothes, I just needed to be somewhere crowded. The hotel clerk gave me a room on the 4th floor. It was small, quiet, and kind of stuffy, but it felt safe. But only until around 2 a.m., when someone knocked on my door. There were 3 slow knocks. I sat up in bed and waited. They knocked again eventually. I peeked through the peephole, and it was a woman, maybe in her 40s. Her face was totally blank and expressionless. She was just staring straight at the door. She didn't say anything, so I didn't make a sound, and eventually she left. It was one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen. The next morning, I asked the front desk if someone had come by to my room. They said no one should have been up there, especially that late. All the rooms on my floor were vacant. That's when it clicked. These weren't random people. They were being sent and fed my details. They were given phrases Caleb used. But if it weren't Caleb, who would do it? And why? I thought about Caleb in rehab, about his obsession with control and making sure I was never fully gone. He didn't need to be the one knocking, he just needed to send others to do it. So I started digging, and there was one conversation I remembered from months before the breakup. Caleb talking about a forum he was on, a place where people shared tactics. He made it sound like it was for productivity or self-improvement. I don't remember the name of it. Honestly, I don't think he ever gave me the name, but in retrospect, it sounded like some creepy, cultish roleplay crap, except it's happening to me for real. Someone, probably Caleb, had hired people to say his words and mimic his patterns, so that even if he was out of my life technically, I'd still be constantly reminded of him. It wasn't stalking in the traditional sense, it was psychological graffiti, like he was spraying himself onto strangers so I could never be sure who I was looking at. I don't think it's about watching me, but rather about making sure I never stop watching for him. I moved again and disappeared off social media again. I even dyed my hair. I told friends not to tell anyone where I was. It worked until last week. I was walking home from the bookstore and a woman passed me on the street and said, "Still hiding behind books, sunshine?" She didn't stop walking even just to look at me. I don't think this will ever stop. Maybe he paid some crazy underground service to do this to me for a year, who knows? Maybe he made it public. Maybe this is some sick underground game now. Who can scare Sunshine the best? Who can get the closest without touching? I can't trust anyone's face anymore. The constant paranoia is truly eating away at my mental health. My family is a group of homebodies that don't travel, so everyone was surprised when my aunt proposed a trip to one of Michigan's Great Lakes. We agreed, wanting to create new memories together. My cousin booked a spacious Airbnb that could somehow accommodate all 18 of us, which felt like a miracle considering the price. The house sat right on the beach, with gorgeous lake views that stretched for miles, almost like an ocean. Most of us claimed rooms in the main house, but because of our large group, some of us were placed in a second building directly behind it, a 2-story garage with bedrooms upstairs. My 3 cousins and I were assigned to sleep there. At first, we didn't think much of it. We spent most of the first day enjoying the hot tub, relaxing on the beach, and soaking in the scenery. It wasn't until night that we entered the garage for real. The space was outdated and neglected, with carpeted bathrooms that smelled like mold, stained bed linens, and a poorly secured latch on the door. Clearly, the cleaners focused on the main home and ignored the garage. My cousins were grossed out and refused to sleep on the beds unless we washed the sheets, so I suggested we do laundry. The machines were small, so we could only do 1 set of bed sheets at a time, and it was obvious we'd be up late. We passed time upstairs, waiting for the first load. My cousin Maria complained about how we got stuck with the worst place, and as she spoke, I started to feel uneasy, like something bad was coming. I've had this feeling before, a rare kind of intuition that usually ends in a nightmare or something worse. I told my cousins to stay alert, and they listened, especially since we'd all experienced a break-in before when we lived in Detroit. Around midnight, the bell rang from the first floor, signaling the wash was done. I went downstairs alone, swapped the load into the dryer, and brought up the clean-smelling sheets. When my cousins saw how clean they were, they wanted their bedding washed too, so I kept going up and down between cycles doing everyone's sheets. At around 2:37 a.m., we were finally done. We made the beds and were too tired to stay up any longer. My cousin Nikki insisted we leave the light on, and while they all fell asleep quickly, I stayed up doing some schoolwork on my phone. I'm a light sleeper, something that stuck with me since the break-in, and I remained hyper-aware of my surroundings even while half asleep. Then, around 3 a.m., a loud bang hit the garage door, like someone had thrown their body against it. I sat up, startled, but my cousins didn't move. I tried telling myself it was just wind, though the noise was too heavy for that. Still, I stayed quiet and tried to sleep. But then it happened again, same deafening crash, this time shaking the garage door. The building trembled from the impact. I was fully awake now, watching the lamp-lit room as my cousins continued to sleep. No animal or gust of wind could cause that. 20 minutes later, the third boom hit. The garage shook again, and finally, 2 of my cousins bolted upright. I asked if they heard that, already knowing the answer. Nikki asked what that was, and I said I don't know, but this is the 3rd time I'm hearing it. We all agreed no wind could cause that sound. Nikki suggested texting her mom, my aunt, so we did. It was 4:11 a.m. when she responded, realizing something serious must be going on. She woke my uncle, who ran outside to check the property. We stayed upstairs, too afraid to move, until we heard knocking. It was my uncle at the door, and and when we opened it, we saw him standing there with my dad and a few of our older male cousins. That's when I knew it was serious. There was no wind, no one playing around. My uncle told us to grab our things that were going to the main house. Then he said there was someone on the property, and that's what made my heart sink. I threw everything into my suitcase, and we all rushed out of the garage. Once inside the main house, most of the family woke up from the noise and commotion. We sat in the living room trying to piece it all together. I told them about the first 2 loud crashes, and my cousins confirmed the third. My aunt explained that when my uncle went out to investigate, she followed him. He shouted "hey" at someone standing behind the garage. The door to the main house slammed behind her right then, and there was no wind to explain it. She feared someone might have slipped into the house, so she ran to wake my dad and cousins. After searching, no one else was found inside. Then my uncle described what he saw. A man stood behind the garage, not hiding or moving, but staring like he wanted to be seen. When my uncle called out, the man didn't flinch. He simply walked away and vanished, not into the darkness, but into thin air. The leaves on the ground didn't crunch, and there were no footsteps left behind. My uncle's not someone who makes up stories either. He's a serious, logical man, which made everything scarier. My brothers added that they found 2 jester cards, one in the main house and one in the garage. The one in the garage was twisted and demonic looking. One cousin pointed out that jesters symbolize mockery, and the loud sounds happened around 3 a.m., the so-called devil's hour. It was as if we were being taunted. My uncle had even checked for footprints, but saw only his and my cousin's, not the man's. Another cousin drove down the road during the incident to try and spot someone fleeing, but found no one. That day, no one returned to the garage. We squeezed into the main house, on floors, couches, anywhere there was room. My mom gave up her bed so we could sleep more comfortably. On the second night, she slept on a couch by the large windows and woke around 4 a.m. to footsteps on the porch. She didn't dare open her eyes. She was afraid of seeing someone looking in. Then she heard someone trying the basement door. It had a weak lock, and my brothers and male cousins were sleeping down there. The door rattled as someone tried to break in. My mom rushed to the basement, but by the time she reached the beachside entrance, no one was there, and all the boys were still fast asleep. That was our last night. Though we planned to stay until Tuesday, we left Monday instead. On the way home, we couldn't stop talking about what had happened. When my mom found out I had been going downstairs alone during laundry, she theorized that someone might have been watching me and thought I was alone in the garage. The time between my last trip downstairs and us going to sleep lined up way too well with the banging sounds. Theories started to form. Some of us thought it was a neighbor trying to scare us off. Others believed there was something paranormal, especially because of the jester cards. My aunt pointed out that a normal person would have run when my uncle spotted them, but this man didn't run. He just watched and disappeared. We contacted the Airbnb host, who claimed she'd review the footage from the camera above the garage door, but we never heard back. It made us wonder, did she know the man? Was he a neighbor? When we first arrived, my sister and cousin had walked to the beach and passed a woman next door. She watched them coldly, without friendliness or a greeting, just an unfriendly gaze. The house was in the middle of nowhere, and we understood how constant Airbnb guests might annoy locals, but we were respectful. We didn't deserve what happened. This was our first family trip, and hopefully not our last, even after everything we went through.
This is a story about the importance of truly knowing people. You may think you have a good read on someone, but in reality, you have no idea what they're thinking or what they're capable of. This happened maybe 4 or 5 years ago. The struggle of everyday life was starting to wear thin on me and my girlfriend Stacy. She suggested that we rent a cabin out in the woods just to escape for a few days. Naturally, I loved the idea, but I wasn't exactly rolling in the cash. So she floated another idea. My best friend Randy and his girlfriend were close to us, so she suggested that they come with us to make it like a couple's getaway. It would be fun hanging out, and they would be able to pay for half the trip. I loved the idea, and when I presented it to Randy,
He was on board immediately. Since we were taking this trip in the middle of winter, we wanted a cabin with a fireplace and somewhere that would just give us that warm and cozy feeling. Stacy found a place, and we booked it for the end of that month. We were excited and started planning meals and other fun stuff to do at the cabin. Less than a week until the trip, Randy and his girlfriend broke up. The breakup was sudden, and it didn't end well. Stacy and I tried to figure out if we should offer Randy his money back or just not say anything. We really didn't have the funds to do this alone, but it's also not fair to make Randy pay for half a trip that he's not even going on. I called Randy to talk about it, and he told me not to worry about it. I offered several times to give him his money back, but he insisted that we still go and have a romantic getaway. When I told Stacy the news, she was excited, and we started getting pumped for our trip alone. The next day, which was only a few days before the trip, Randy told me that he found someone else to go on the trip with us. I told him that I wasn't crazy about that idea, and when Stacy heard, she agreed. We didn't really want to travel with some random rebound that even Randy barely knew. I tried explaining to him that travel compatibility is a real thing, and that we know nothing about this woman. Randy begged, and after a few minutes, he talked me into it. He offered to pay for my entire portion of the trip, and he promised that his new girlfriend would be cool and that we would love her. Stacy and I were not happy. We knew the trip had the potential to end in awkward disaster. That alone would be a horror story. It took a little while, but we decided that we were going to make the best of this situation. The weekend finally arrived, and we carpooled to the cabin together in my truck. Randy introduced us to his new girlfriend, Lucy. She seemed sweet and even a little quiet. Stacy and I are not shy, and we can be loud and annoying. We spent most of the drive trying to get to know Lucy, but she wasn't very talkative. I barely knew what her voice sounded like by the time we got to the cabin. The trip started fine. We all got settled in, and we were just hanging around the fireplace chatting. Stacy and I love playing card games, but we especially love Uno. We just love its simplicity, and we could play it just about anywhere and anytime. So Stacy suggested that we play Uno, and everyone was on board. Even Lucy seemed like she was finally starting to come out of her shell. During the Uno game, we witnessed our first red flag of the weekend. When Stacy called Uno, indicating that she only had one card left, Lucy looked over at her, and with rage and anger in her normally mousy voice, she started to rip into Stacy. We all kind of laughed at first, thinking she was kidding around, but that made it so much worse. Lucy started to go insane. She was screaming that Stacy must have been cheating, and there's no way she could have only had one card left. Stacy was defending herself, and Lucy just kept acting like a toddler and screaming about her cheating. I'm not being sarcastic when I say she was screaming about Uno with people she barely knew. Even if Stacy was cheating, which she wasn't, this was an outrageous overreaction. When Randy tried to calm her down, she threw all her cards and left the living room. He apologized to us, and we just laughed it off. Later that night, Stacy made dinner, and Lucy seemed completely fine now, almost like she didn't throw a temper tantrum a few hours ago. This is red flag number 2. While we were eating, Lucy started to overshare details about her and Randy's personal time together, things you don't say to others in public, like very private and personal things that I'm not going to mention in the story for Randy's sake. I could tell he was embarrassed. I just kept trying to crack jokes and change the subject. Eventually she stopped, and the four of us didn't do much for the rest of the evening. That night, Stacy woke me up in the middle of the night and told me to listen. I got up, and I could hear Lucy and Randy arguing. I couldn't fully understand what they were saying because the bedrooms were on opposite ends of the cabin, and we had our door closed. I could just tell by the tone of the arguing and inflection in the voices that they were clearly fighting. The awkwardness of this was crazy, and we didn't want to make Randy feel any worse, so we pretended that we didn't hear it, and we decided not to mention it the next day. The next morning and day were uneventful. Randy seemed distant, and we barely saw or heard from Lucy. It wasn't until that night that things got weird. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up to Randy standing over me. It scared the hell out of me. I asked him what he was doing, and he looked terrified. He asked if he could stay in our room tonight and if we could keep the door locked. I was confused and asked him if he could explain why. Apparently, he woke up during the night and Lucy was standing at the bottom of the bed, just staring at him. When he asked what she was doing, she just shrugged and said that she was watching him sleep just in case, whatever that means. He said they stared at each other for a moment, and then she just turned and walked out of the room. Several minutes later, she still didn't return to the room. He decided to get up and go check on her and make sure she was okay, and that's when he noticed something on her side of the bed. He moved the blanket a little bit, and right there on the bed was a large knife. That's when he decided to sneak over to our room. He quietly walked through the dark cabin, trying not to make a noise. When he got to the living room, he heard Lucy humming to herself and wandering around like she was almost dancing. He said it kind of looked like she was sleepwalking, but worse. When she was almost at our bedroom door, the floor creaked subtly and she stopped humming. She turned to his general direction, and in an ominous voice, she said, "I see you." Randy said that it didn't even look like she was looking at him, just in his direction. After that, she turned around and continued to hum and skip around the dark cabin. That's when he entered our room and locked the door. I was trying to process all of this, and at the same time, Stacy woke up. We were in the middle of nowhere, so we didn't really know what to do. Lucy could have very well just been in some sort of elaborate sleepwalking state, but I don't know if that explains the knife. While we were contemplating, we could still hear Lucy pacing around the cabin. A few minutes later, we heard the front door to the cabin slam shut. We opened the bedroom door, and Lucy wasn't there. Randy looked out of the window and saw Lucy heading into the freezing cold forest with a t-shirt and a pair of shorts on. Randy ran to his bedroom and screamed because the knife was gone. Stacy said we had to go out and get her and couldn't just let her wander in the woods in the middle of the night, especially if she was sleepwalking. Randy was terrified and wanted nothing to do with his new girlfriend. Stacy went back to our room and started putting on warm clothes and a jacket. Randy was pleading with her to just call a park ranger or something. I've known Randy my entire life, and I've never seen him this scared. During our brief discussion in the bedroom, we heard the cabin door open and close again. We all got quiet and listened intently. We heard Lucy stomping down the hall toward her and Randy's bedroom, and she was still humming. We stayed in our bedroom that night and didn't sleep at all. At 6 in the morning, we heard Lucy in the kitchen washing dishes. We all went out there, and she greeted us like nothing was wrong. Stacy and I chalked this all up to Lucy just being a bit off, and Randy going through some of his own issues since he had just broken up with his long-term girlfriend before this trip. Everything we experienced the night before was weird for sure, but it could be explained by sleepwalking or something like that. Randy was convinced that something darker was at play here, but Stacy dismissed it right away. She went to help Lucy clean, and I tried to console Randy the best I could before he went back to his bedroom. Not 2 minutes later, he texted me and told me to go to his bedroom right now and not to tell anyone. I went over there, and he showed me something horrifying. While he was packing up his stuff, he moved Lucy's bag. When he set her bag down, a large knife fell out of the side, the same knife that Randy saw the night before. I could see and feel how scared Randy was. He put the knife back in her bag and waited in the living room for everyone else to be ready to leave. The drive home was full of tension. Just knowing that Lucy had that knife in her bag freaked me out. Thankfully, we made it home safe and physically unharmed. Randy ghosted Lucy after that, and she must not have cared because she never tried to get a hold of him either. Occasionally, Stacy will still try to find Lucy on social media, but she's never had any luck. She's even looked at inmate lockup records and still no Lucy. It's like there's no record of Lucy existing, making us feel like she was clearly using a fake name. But if that's the case, what did she want? I wonder if she intended to hurt Randy. Truly, I have no idea what to think about that weekend. The fact that she had the knife and there's no record of this woman just makes me think whoever she was, she had dark intentions. I guess it's good that, for whatever reason, she didn't act on them. The last few years, I've really separated myself from the rest of the world. I've always been someone who likes to be alone, and I don't love the company of others except for some very few people in my life. A few years ago, I was at the height of my introverted personality. I would go out of my way to find peace and quiet. During this time of my life, I would often find cabins and other secluded places to stay on the weekends whenever I had the funds to make it happen. That may seem ridiculous to some people, but my anxiety for just normal interactions with people was so bad at this point that I would go to those extreme lengths just to be alone. This extreme habit continued for about 2 years. During that time, something happened at one of my weekend cabin getaways that really freaked me out. The weekend started like any other one. I found a secluded cabin about 2 hours from home and made the trek out there. I usually would use that weekend time to hike, spend time outdoors, and mostly just catch up on reading. I love to read, and being out in the wilderness where it's quiet always helps me to relax and concentrate. I arrived Friday evening at the cabin, made a small dinner, read a few chapters of my book, and went to bed early. The next morning, I decided to take a long hike. I've always just found peace being outside in nature. Whether it's sunny, rainy, or even snowing, I just love being outside. While I was hiking through the woods, I could hear something behind me. The sound of twigs and branches snapping. You could assume that it was just the sounds of nature, but it sounded almost too deliberate to be natural. I tend to be irrational, so my mind went right away to somebody following me. But every time I turned around and scanned the surroundings, I was completely alone. I kept hiking for a little while longer, but that feeling of paranoia just kept growing. I planned on hiking a little further, but I decided to cut the hike short and head back to the house. I had gotten to a point where I wasn't even enjoying being outside anymore. That night was particularly rough on me. Maybe it was because of all the anxiety I was feeling on the hike earlier, but I just remember being sad. I decided to have a drink, and that turned into a few drinks. Once I started to feel the drinks hitting my system, I felt better, and all that anxiety from earlier slowly disappeared. I tried to read, but instead, I just put on some music and started to vibe. Around 11 that night, I thought I heard a knock at the door. I turned the music off and made my way to the door. The front door was a heavy wooden door with 2 rectangular windows set into it. I looked outside and saw nothing, so I walked away, and before I could sit back down, I heard another knock at the door. I went back over to look out, and this time, someone was standing there, but it was too dark to make out any details. Before I said anything, I turned on the front light, which mostly illuminated the man standing out there. He didn't look scary or disheveled. It was the opposite of that. A clean-cut man with a suit was standing on the other side of the door. He was about 6 feet tall, had an athletic build, and was clean-shaven with a slicked-back haircut. This man was clearly out of place. He looked like he was ready for a business meeting, not a nighttime walk in the woods. I couldn't figure out why a man in a suit would randomly show up to a secluded cabin at 11 p.m. From my side of the door, I asked the man if he was okay and what he wanted. There was a weird and almost unnatural pause before the man answered. It was almost like he was processing what I was saying before he answered. Then he finally answered and said that he was driving with his girlfriend earlier. He claimed that he had spent hours walking around looking for her, and now he's lost. He asked if he could please come inside so he could call someone for help. On its own, this was alarming and unsettling, just because a random stranger appeared at the door in the middle of the woods. But one of the most unsettling parts of this was his lack of any emotion in his voice. This did not sound like a man who was lost and missing his girlfriend. He sounded completely void of emotion. I told him to back away from the door and wait at the end of the driveway, and that I would call someone for help. He paused again and looked around slowly. With that same lack of energy, he said that he really needed to come inside. Something was outside, and if he didn't get inside for help, he was going to be in trouble. The tension I felt at this moment is almost indescribable. I told him I was calling the police and that he could either wait outside or leave, but I was not letting him inside the cabin. As I walked away from the door to grab my phone, I heard him say that he wanted to hide inside the cabin. He was in trouble and he needed to hide inside. I grabbed my phone, and that's when he started to aggressively pound on the door. I ran back to the door, and I started to scream some vulgar things at the man outside. In the middle of my rant, I stopped yelling because I heard the man laughing. This was by far the most emotion the man had shown. I looked out the window, and the man had his face practically pressed up against it. His face was just inches away from mine. I nearly fell over from the shock of seeing him so close to me. In a calm voice, he said, "Come on, Victor, just open the door already." Somehow, this stranger in his suit knew my name. I was frozen for a few seconds, and then without thinking, I dialed 911 and I told them that I was staying at a cabin and a strange man was trying to break in. As soon as I hung up the phone, I looked out the window and nobody was there. For almost 15 minutes I waited for the police, and I never once stopped looking out the window. During that time, I didn't see any movement outside. It was one single patrol car, and when he got there, I opened the door and let him in quickly. I told the cop everything, and he seemed concerned and confused. He told me that none of the other surrounding residents reported anything weird, and this was the first time he had ever gotten a call like this. The cop was nice and could tell that I was a nervous wreck. He suggested that I drive into town and stay at one of the hotels if I was still scared. I told him that I had been drinking and that I didn't feel comfortable driving my car, but I didn't want to stay there alone. He was nice enough to offer to drive me into town. As we were walking to the patrol car, I heard the officer make a weird sound, almost like he was shocked. I asked what was wrong, and he pointed to the tires of my car in the driveway. My tires were deflated, and it looked like they had been slashed. I started to unravel a bit, and the cop did a good job of keeping me as grounded as I could be. He drove me to a nearby hotel and stayed with me in the lobby until I could get in touch with my dad. I stayed in that hotel that night, and my dad came to pick me up in the morning and help me sort out the details of getting my car towed. The owner of the cabin reached out to me a million times to apologize, but I just didn't care. I wanted this experience to be over. I didn't even ask for a refund. Some people have floated the idea to me that somehow the owner of the cabin was involved in this nightmare, or that the owner himself was the man in the suit, but I don't think so. The man had a picture of himself on his profile, and the man in the suit looked nothing like this guy. I never got any answers, and I'm sure I never will. I still get chills to this day when I think about that night. Even seeing those stupid prism windows freaks me out. I hate knowing that somewhere out there, this man is potentially still terrorizing people. About 6 months ago, my father passed away. I'm not looking for any sympathy or anything like that. I didn't have a good relationship with the man. He wasn't a bad guy. He just didn't know how to be a proper father to me specifically. At a very young age, I realized that I was nothing like him. I knew I wasn't going to become the person he wanted me to be, and I know that bothered him, even if it was just subconscious. Fast forward to 6 months ago when my father passed, and I was surprised to see that he left me his cabin in his will. I've had friends tell me that this was my father playing one last joke on me, but I don't think that's the case. I think he knew I would sell it, and I think that's what he wanted me to do. After some of the boring paperwork details, I was told that, to sell it, I needed to go and clean it up and maybe fix some of the things that needed work. I used that as an excuse to stay at the cabin one last time. This was my way of saying goodbye to my father. When I arrived at the cabin, the first thing I noticed was the horrific smell. It smelled like death in there, and no, he didn't pass away in the cabin. He actually hadn't been to the cabin in almost a year before he died. I looked around for any dead animals, but I think the place just stunk from years of not being cleaned properly. The next thing I noticed after the smell was that the cabin looked exactly how I remembered it looking when I was 10. He still had the same setup, the same gross couches, the same bookshelves. Literally everything was the same. I spent a few hours downstairs deep cleaning every inch of that place. Luckily, my father fixed the roof a few years ago, so that was the one thing I didn't need to worry about. While I was going over my checklist of things I wanted and needed to do, I kept hearing noises coming from above me, like the sound of rustling and movement. That's when I remembered that he had an attic in this cabin. Attic might be a stretch. It's really like a mix of an attic and a crawl space, almost like it doesn't know exactly what it wants to be. There's a back hallway in the cabin, and located on the ceiling in the back hall is a pull-down cord. When you pull the cord, the door opens, and one of the retractable ladders comes down. I slowly started going up the ladder, and I was prepared to be attacked by a legion of raccoons or squirrels. Instead, I was attacked by an even more foul smell than before. I started to cough from the horrible smell in the attic. After my coughing spell, I looked around and was disgusted. There were boxes everywhere, but the worst part was that there was trash all over the place. Wrappers from food, empty beer cans, and just garbage everywhere. I knew my dad was not the cleanest person, but I also didn't think my dad was this messy and disgusting. I picked up some of the trash, but I only stayed up there for a little bit. The smell was horrible, and I was tired from cleaning downstairs. I wasn't mentally prepared to go through all the boxes and deal with the upstairs at that moment. I took out a bunch of trash and decided that I would clean upstairs tomorrow. Not long after, I went to bed. I put some of my clean sheets on his bed and slept in his old room. I woke up during the night because I thought I heard the sound of rustling again. I started to think that maybe the walls had some kind of animal infestation. That would explain why I kept hearing movement, and if animals were living in the walls, maybe animals were also dying in the walls, and that would explain the smell. The only problem with my theory was that the sounds I kept hearing were clearly coming from above my head in the attic. Since I wasn't sleeping very well, I decided to plug my nose and go check it out. When I got to the back hall, I noticed that the attic door latch was open and the ladder was hanging down. I thought that was weird, but totally possible that I didn't shut the door all the way, and maybe the wind or raccoons knocked it down. When I went to latch the door, I noticed another snack food wrapper on the ground at the base of the ladder. I couldn't believe there was more trash. I picked it up, stormed into the kitchen angrily, and threw the trash away. I grabbed a water bottle, went to the living room, and sat on the couch. It was dark in the living room, and I knew I wasn't going to fall asleep again, so I decided to stay awake. He had a small end table next to the couch with a little lamp on it. I turned on the lamp, and it wasn't very strong. It was a low orange light, but it was enough for right now. Just enough so I didn't have to sit in complete darkness. I started to think about my father. Then I started thinking about my father in this cabin. I was thinking to myself, why would he ever hang out in that nasty, dirty attic when he has the entire cabin to himself? Even though the cabin was disgusting, it was a lot nicer than a dirty attic. While I was sitting there, I looked over to the corner of the room, and I saw something weird. It looked like a blanket covering something next to the recliner. That alone wouldn't be weird. What was weird is that I cleaned that entire downstairs earlier, and I don't remember a blanket covering anything. I slowly got up and started to approach the blanket. I froze in my tracks. I was a couple feet away from the blanket, and I noticed something that looked like the bottom of a boot protruding from the blanket. I slowly took a step back and tried to focus my eyes in the mostly dark room. I was staring right at the blanket, and I watched the entire blanket shift. It was clear to me that someone was under this blanket. I wasn't hearing animals earlier. I was listening to the sound of a person moving around. I stood there for a second, just watching the blanket. The more I stared at it, the more I realized how obvious it was that a person was hiding there. I could clearly see the blanket moving up and down from whoever was breathing underneath the blanket. I didn't want to find anything else out about this person. I slowly retreated to the kitchen, grabbed my phone and keys, and sprinted out of the cabin. I ran to my car and started it, and started backing down the long driveway. While I was backing out, I looked up and saw a scary-looking, mangy man run out the door. He didn't chase my car or anything, he just ran outside and stood in front of the cabin. I called the local police department and reported this to them. They told me that because my father hadn't been living in the cabin for some time, some random person probably moved in there for warmth, and when nobody ever came to the cabin, he probably just stayed. Judging by the smell, he figured that the man was probably there for at least a year, which makes sense because my father hadn't been to the cabin in a while before he passed away. By the time the police showed up, the man was gone. I have no other information about who the man was, where he came from, or where he went. I don't think he intended to hurt me unless he had to. He clearly had a lot of chances and didn't do anything, but it doesn't change the fact that I was sitting next to a strange man who had been living in filth in my father's attic. I never took another step inside that cabin after that night. I hired someone to clean it out without even telling them. Maybe that makes me a jerk. They got rid of everything inside, and I sold it as is. I hope whoever owns the cabin now is as happy as my father was in that place, and that they never have to deal with a surprise visitor. This happened a couple of years ago, right before school ended. It was the last day of 8th grade. It was exactly what you'd expect on the final day of middle school. Excitement and bittersweet goodbyes. Everyone was running around, scribbling signatures and cheesy messages in each other's yearbooks. My middle school was huge, easily over 1,000 students. So to keep things manageable, the teachers collected our yearbooks and passed them around to different classrooms, making sure everyone who wanted to got a chance to sign. I'm sure you could see how that could create problems. Anyone who wanted to could write whatever they wanted in anyone's yearbook. The teachers tried their best to prevent things from getting out of hand, but I knew a few kids who wrote some mean messages to people they didn't like. At the end of the day, when I got my yearbook back, I flipped through the pages eagerly, reading all the goofy notes from my friends. But as I scanned the pages, something caught my eye. There was a signature below the face of someone I had never seen before. His name was Samuel Robinson III, a name I'm going to remember for as long as I live. The message he wrote was short, simple, and honestly a bit unsettling. It read, "Hags, I'll be seeing you again." I stared at the page, confused out of my mind. I'd never even spoken a single word to this Samuel kid. It wasn't like there was anything I could do about it, though. The school year was over, so I couldn't see him even if I wanted to. I just chalked it up to some weird kid being weird, or maybe an honest mistake. Either way, I stopped thinking about it. A few hours passed, and before I knew it, I was at home hosting a sleepover in my basement with my best friends Kevin, David, and Kieran. The four of us ate Doritos and played Call of Duty all night. My parents' bedroom was 3 floors above us, so we didn't have to worry much about keeping the noise down. We were messing around on my dad's rowing machine sometime just before 2 when we heard a sharp knock at the storm door. The sound instantly silenced us. Who the hell would knock on the storm door? It must have been someone who either didn't want to wake my parents up, or knew we were down there, or both. It didn't make sense. The person kept knocking in the same rhythmic pattern. I could tell Kieran was about to say something, and I couldn't stop him in time. In a loud and assertive voice, he asked who was there. I wanted to knock him out. He had basically broadcasted to whoever was out there that we were down there. My basement doesn't have any external windows, so it was unlikely that they had known we were down there, but now they did. After a long pause and no more knocking, a muffled voice answered back. He said, "Come around to the back door," in a high-pitched voice that genuinely sounded cheerful, like he was a friend of ours trying to join the sleepover. It was definitely a teenager's voice too, and it didn't sound like someone who was pretending to raise their voice either. I was pretty scared, I can't lie. My friends were seemingly unfazed though, like they thought it was somehow exciting that some random kid was outside my house. They insisted that I at least check it out, and even though I didn't want to, they pressured me into it. We crept upstairs, careful not to make too much noise. I approached the back door slowly, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest. Through the narrow glass pane beside it, I could see a shadowy figure standing under the dim light. I got a little closer, and his face came into view. My jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized who it was. It was him. It was that kid Samuel Robinson III who had signed my yearbook. My friends went to go open the door, God knows why, but I stopped them, saying I knew who it was. I explained to them what had happened, and that changed their mood a bit. Keep in mind, Sam was still standing outside while we were talking, and he could definitely see in at us. He must have noticed how freaked out I was, because he started motioning to the side of the house like he wanted me to go over to the window. You might be wondering why none of us were taking this situation more seriously. I honestly think it was because it wasn't like some older, strange man was harassing us. It was a kid from our own school. Still, I wasn't opening the door for him. Instead, I went over to my kitchen window and cracked it open just a tiny bit. My friends followed me and stood a little off to the side. He walked over to the window and I asked him what he wanted, telling him I recognized him from our yearbook. He said, "Oh, so you got my message," and introduced himself as Sam. Then he went on to say he always watched me from afar and that we could have been good friends. I agreed with him just so that I wouldn't piss him off, but there was 0% chance I would have been friends with this kid given any circumstances. I didn't want to press him right away, but I had to know, so I asked him how he knew where I lived. He didn't respond, and I didn't know what to say. Before I could de-escalate the situation, David called him a creepy stalker and told him to piss off. Sam's smile disappeared. He tilted his head like he didn't understand what David had just said. Then, just as quickly, his expression twisted into something I can only describe as hatred. He went from passive and honestly kind of friendly to aggressive and angry. He started screaming things at me, how he hated my friends and thought we should all die, how my ex hated me and random stuff he had no right knowing. He reached toward the window and tried to force it open, but I jammed it shut and locked it. He started snarling at the window and banging on it like an animal. He was 2 seconds away from shattering it, I'm telling you. We must have caused quite the commotion because my parents came rushing down the stairs, demanding to know why we had woken them up. That's when Sam ran away. I told my parents what happened as quickly as I could, and my dad raced outside in his underwear. He came back a few minutes later, saying he had no idea where the kid went. I'm not sure why, but my parents didn't call the police. They just told us to go back to sleep and they deal with the school the following morning, just to give the kid the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, they contacted the school. That's when we learned the disturbing truth. Sam had been expelled a few weeks before the year finished, and he shouldn't have ever been at the school on the last day. Apparently, the yearbooks were printed before his expulsion, which explained why his picture was still included. That meant he had snuck into the school somehow just to write me that message, which freaked me out beyond belief. Despite working with the school to find out more, nobody could track Sam down. It was like he and his parents didn't exist. The whole thing was a pretty big deal, but the school did what they could to keep things under wraps. To this day, I still have no idea how he knew where I lived. That's what freaks me out the most. The running theory is that he was a mentally challenged and troubled young boy who took a strange liking to me for whatever reason, and then he stalked me for who knows how long. My parents were worried for weeks. It's something we don't talk about anymore because it's just uncomfortable, but living in that same house has never felt the same ever since. My friend Garrett is a little unhinged, and when I say a little, I mean a lot. He's one of those guys that goes around boasting about how crazy and aggressive he is like it's cool or something. He's constantly getting into fights, doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut, and spends more time in the gym than anywhere else, including his own house. There are actually 5 stories about him I could choose to tell, but the scariest one by far is the one you're about to hear. It also directly involves me, and I feel much more comfortable telling my own story rather than someone else's. This happened a couple of weeks ago, which was also coincidentally the last day of senior year, May 2019. The graduation ceremony wasn't scheduled for a few days, so even though we were done, we still had to stick around. It's tradition for all the graduating seniors to get plastered on the last day of classes, so that's exactly what we did. There's this huge clock tower in the center of campus where all the seniors convene to get drunk, which is exactly where we were at 10 p.m. It was packed. There were over 1,000 people crammed into that one courtyard. It was bittersweet, for me at least, but I think everyone was relieved at having finished finals, which are pretty tough at my school. There are a handful of other senior traditions I could tell you about, but I'm going to try to keep things succinct. There were 6 of us. It was me, C, T, R, N, and obviously Garrett. I don't think the rest of my friends would be comfortable with their names out there, so I'm just calling them by their initials. I should also really quickly mention that we lived off campus, meaning we had to walk through the city to get home. There are a decent amount of homeless people in that city, so it's not rare to encounter some of them late at night. Anyway, we were heading back home from the clock tower when Garrett did some Garrett stuff. Well, it wasn't really his fault, but that's neither here nor there. As we were crossing the street, some random homeless guy ran up to our group and started tweaking. Usually, the homeless people around here keep to themselves since they're all tripping on drugs and didn't notice their own surroundings. But this guy clearly wanted to engage. He was just standing in the middle of the crosswalk, yelling things at us like he was a bridge troll protecting the other side of the street. We laughed a little and started walking in a wide semicircle around him, as we didn't want to piss him off or antagonize him. Well, everyone but Garrett, that is. Instead of disengaging, Garrett started yelling things back at the guy, telling him to get the F out of the street and to stop harassing strangers. The tweaker didn't like that and took a few aggressive steps toward him. That's when the rest of us jumped in to prevent an altercation from happening. We must have intimidated the tweaker because he stopped charging and went back to just yelling things. I pulled Garrett out of the street, trying to get him to behave, but he pushed my hand away. Before any of us could do anything, he charged full speed at the tweaker and screamed, "I'm crazy." The tweaker started running away, which caused Garrett to stop charging and start laughing. I know it's bad, but the scene was genuinely funny, as messed up as it was. It was like running full speed into a flock of birds and watching them scatter. We started walking towards our house after that, but after a few minutes, we realized the tweaker was following us. When he caught us looking back at him, he started yelling things about how we had made a big mistake and how he was going to, quote, call a niche, whatever that meant. We started heckling the guy back, hoping he'd get scared and leave. but I'm pretty sure we only intensified whatever tantrum he was having. Look, I'm not proud of everything that happened that night, but we were about to graduate from a very prestigious university and had been celebrating all night with alcohol, so we weren't in the right headspace to properly evaluate the situation. About a block away from our house, we realized the guy was still following, albeit a little further back now. I told the rest of the guys I didn't feel comfortable leading him to our house, and the other guys agreed. So naturally, Garrett took off toward the homeless guy before the group could come to a consensus. He again started sprinting at the guy, who once again fled in the opposite direction. Garrett turned and jogged back towards us, and we all jogged up the street. We thought that was it. We made it back to our house, pretty confident we hadn't been followed that time. I'm not even going to go into what we did back at the house. Let's just say it was a level of degeneracy I won't be approaching anytime soon. I can't even tell you what time it was. I was stumbling out of the front door to pick up my DoorDash when I noticed something odd. The side gate that led into our backyard was wide open. It was especially weird because we used this little strand of twine to keep it shut, so the door being open meant that someone had deliberately undone it. I instantly made the connection. It was probably that guy from earlier. I had enough sense to connect the dots, but I guess I didn't have enough sense to react accordingly. The smart thing would have been to alert my friends, but my drunken self decided to investigate. I put the DoorDash on the porch and went around the house, trying my best to walk straight. I turned the corner into the backyard, and before I could even see, I felt a rope around my throat. I flailed around wildly, but it was no use. Someone was strangling me from behind, and there was nothing I could do about it. I felt the rope's frayed ends digging into my throat as he tightened it with all his strength. I genuinely thought I was going to die. With all my might, I swung my legs backward, and he lost his footing. The two of us hit the ground, and I could breathe again, but he was still on top of me. In a fit of rage, he clawed at my face, and I could feel blood streaming down my cheeks. I threw him off of me, and he got to his feet before running out of sight. I'll try and keep things short from here on out. I ended up having to go to the hospital that night. The cuts weren't bad, but I needed a bunch of shots to protect me against any kind of diseases the guy might have had. The police were less than helpful, and since I was moving out a week later, there wasn't much I could do either. The worst part about the whole thing was that I had visible cuts in all my grad photos. Garrett felt so bad he ended up taking me to Nobu, but I never held anything against him. I just hope he's learned his lesson about not antagonizing people who have nothing to lose. When I was in the 7th grade, there was this kid named Sven in my homeroom. To put it mildly, he was a bit strange. He was one of those kids who didn't socialize with anyone else, even though people frequently tried to include him in things. I didn't have all my classes with him, but from what I remember, he would always sit in the same spot in every room, the back corner opposite the door. Without fail, he'd show up to school in the exact same outfit every day, cargo shorts and an oversized burgundy hoodie. He obviously didn't talk much, but when he did have to answer a question or read a passage, he had a really deep voice that lots of other kids made fun of him for. I don't recall him having any friends at all, which made sense. This one time, my friend Tyler caught him slicing worms during recess, which I'm pretty sure he ended up getting detention for. Speaking of recess, Sven would spend the whole period by himself next to the fence that bordered the woods. He never played any games or did anything even remotely kid-centric. He'd just stand next to that fence doing God knows what. Some of my friends claim to have seen him talking to someone on the other side, but I've personally never seen that, so I'm not going to spread potential lies. I'm trying to think of other things about him worth mentioning. He had several quirks and some other weird habits typical of any strange middle schooler, but none relevant to the story I'm going to tell. This happened on the last day of school. I went to a pretty big middle school with lots of kids per grade, meaning there were a ton of concurrent classes with students from the same year happening at all times. Because of that, there was this last day of school tradition where students from the same year would sneak into and sit in random classrooms to try and mess with the teachers. I'm pretty sure the teachers were privy to this and played along to amuse the kids, but that's neither here nor there. I don't remember the exact time this happened, but I do remember I was in one of the few classes I shared with Sven. Everything was exactly as it had been all day. The entire class was mixed up with random students that were supposed to be elsewhere. I was kind of a stickler for rules growing up. That's just how I was raised, so I never participated in any of the tomfoolery. My friends all did though, so I was often alone in all of my classes since they went to other rooms together. This was one of those times. All my friends had left the room, and the only kid I knew even a little, coincidentally, was Sven. Sven was acting stranger than usual that day. That's something I remember distinctly. I can't fully remember what we were learning or doing in class, but I do remember that Sven was tapping his foot pretty aggressively, something he never did. He was also constantly looking around the room, as if searching for someone or trying to keep tabs on someone. I don't think he was watching me, but I couldn't be sure. The other thing I remember was that there were a lot more kids in the class I didn't recognize. Granted, one or two wasn't anything out of the ordinary since everything was switched around, but the odds that there were so many students I had never even seen before were slim. At some point, the teacher, I'm pretty sure her name was Miss Bell, told us to get into groups of 3 or 4 to work on some kind of end-of-year reflection worksheet. Nothing serious. Most kids just used it as an excuse to talk and mess around. At one point, Miss Bell walked over to her desk, picked up the classroom phone, and turned her back to us. A few minutes later, another teacher showed up, I think from the room next door. They stepped just outside the classroom door and started whispering. It wasn't a long conversation, maybe half a minute, but something about it felt off, like they were trying not to cause a scene. I could tell something was up. Miss Bell looked uneasy. That's honestly the best way I can describe her demeanor. After they finished talking, Miss Bell and the other teacher came back into the room. They didn't say anything to the class. They just walked over to a few specific kids and knelt down beside their desks. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but whatever it was quiet, clearly like they didn't want the rest of us to notice. A minute later, those same kids got up and followed the teachers into the hallway. No one really reacted. I felt like I was the only one who even noticed what was going on. Miss Bell came back a few minutes later, alone this time. She didn't say anything about the kids who left, just sat back down at her desk and started shuffling papers like nothing had happened. But right after she did, the fire alarm went off. Miss Bell didn't really react, like she knew it was going to happen. She told us to line up and head outside, and we joined the rest of the school out by the field behind the building. As usual, everyone was grouped by homeroom, so I ended up standing with a bunch of familiar faces again. But while we were all standing there, I looked back at the school for no reason, just out of habit I guess, and I could have sworn I saw something move in one of the second-story windows. It was quick, and maybe it was just a reflection or a shadow or something, but it felt wrong. The school was supposed to be completely empty. I kept it to myself, but I was really scared when it came to re-entering the building. We never went back inside though. Before the alarm even stopped ringing, we started hearing sirens. A few minutes later, police cars started pulling into the lot. Not just 1 or 2, but a whole line of them. They didn't waste time either. Officers jumped out and rushed straight into the building. No one explained anything. Teachers just told us to stay calm and wait. After a while, someone came around and said school was being let out early. No buses, we had to call our parents. We were never told what actually happened. My parents ended up telling me what happened, or at least what the school had told them. They told me that a bunch of kids who didn't even go to our school had somehow gotten in. A rumor went around that they were planning to set the place on fire. Apparently, Miss Bell had discovered some very alarming tools in one of the kids' backpacks, and the school tried flushing everyone out with the fire drill. The details are still a bit fuzzy, so I'm hoping I'm explaining everything properly. The part that really stuck with me was what my mom said at the end, that the kids had been let in by Sven through the side fence during recess. The whole thing was so bizarre, it's still difficult to process even now. I never saw Sven again.
This is a very delicate personal story of mine, so I'm going to change names and small details around so nobody may recognize it to be me. I'd been good friends with a girl named Jess for almost 6 years, since high school basically. We even went to college together and dormed together. When we were in our junior year of college,
We moved out of the dorms and into an off-campus apartment. It was a 3-bedroom apartment, and our third roommate was our friend Stacy. We were less close with Stacy, but we had no problems with her. In fact, the 3 of us would go out together on the weekends. I just had more of that best friend tell everything vibe with Jess, if you know what I mean. It was the spring semester, spring break was approaching, and we were planning the days we'd be going home. Stacy and I were planning on leaving the same day. Jess was going to be staying an extra day because she said she needed to work one final shift at her job. So the day came that Stacy and I left. I said bye to Jess, even though I would probably be seeing her the next day at home. I left and hit the road. But you ever forget something, and when you remember it, it hits you like a brick? That was what happened to me while on the freeway. I pulled to the side of the road in a hurry and checked my bags for my laptop. I checked my backpack too. I realized I had forgotten it. I had driven half an hour already, and now I had to go back just to get my laptop. As much as I didn't want to, I had to. I couldn't go almost 2 weeks without my computer. So my half-hour drive back to the apartment began. When I got back, I let myself in and called for Jess, ready to tell her what an idiot I was. She didn't call back, so she didn't appear to be in the apartment. Her door was wide open though. She usually kept it shut, especially when she wasn't home. I checked my room for my laptop up and down, but I couldn't find it. Curiously, I walked to Jess's doorway and looked into her room, and there it was. My laptop was open on her bed, next to her laptop. Why didn't she call or text me? I went to pick it up and saw my laptop was signed in. She somehow got into my account. That meant she knew my password. I switched to looking at her laptop, and it got worse from here. There was a folder open, containing a bunch of pictures. Pictures of me. Some of the most disturbing pictures I found were pictures of me passed out on the couch after drunk nights out, and pictures of me in a towel, either in my room or in the bathroom. My heart was racing. I shut my laptop and started searching her room, her closet specifically, and I found a number of my belongings, mostly articles of clothing. Some I won't mention because it's disturbing and embarrassing. I grabbed all my stuff I could find and stormed out. I locked my bedroom door and left the apartment. I didn't call Jess. I called my parents as soon as I got back in my car. They didn't have any words. They couldn't even give me advice because this was so messed up. By the time I got home, I saw Jess blocked me on everything. Instagram, Snap. I assumed she blocked my number too, but I never tried contacting her again. By the time I got back to the apartment a week and a half later, all of her stuff was out of the apartment. I didn't see her again for almost a whole year, until she was out with our mutual friends and we ran into each other. She wouldn't even look at me. She couldn't even gather the courage to confront me about it. The person that I thought was my best friend for 6 years was a sick, twisted stalker storing lewd pictures of me and stealing my belongings. This brought to light an incident that happened our first month in the apartment. I was drunk after a night of drinking, and I woke up shortly after falling asleep to a sound in my closet. I remembered sitting up, rubbing my eyes and looking around the room, thinking I saw and heard someone in the closet. I was so scared that I ran to Stacy's room screaming because her room was closer. By the time she went to check the room with me, the closet was empty, and Jess allegedly never woke up to come check the commotion. It made sense to me now that she was in my closet that night. I get sick to my stomach thinking about all the things that she may have done that I will never know about. My old best friend Jason had a number of disorders. Well, I guess if you'd call them that. He had insomnia, he frequently had night terrors, and he battles depression. I'm sure he's got other personal issues that he doesn't really share. All I know is he takes a lot of medication. One day, he and his roommate were having serious issues, worse than usual. Jason called me all distressed, saying they just got into a screaming match with one another, and it almost got physical, and that he needed a place to crash for a couple nights. I told him not a problem. He could sleep on the couch in my apartment for a few nights. When he arrived, I tried pressing him for more details on the fight, like why it happened, but he didn't tell me anything. I respected that though. If he didn't want to share personal details like that, I wasn't going to press him further for it. He dropped his backpack full of clothes in the corner of the living room, and he kind of just watched TV and played Call of Duty on my Xbox for most of the day and night. I hung out with him for a bit, but I had my own things to take care of. When I got home, Jason was passed out on the couch under a blanket. I passed him quietly and got ready for bed. I woke up randomly, feeling extremely thirsty, and the water bottle I kept next to my bed was empty. So I quietly went through the living room towards the kitchen. As I passed by the couch, I couldn't help but notice Jason wasn't on it. His bag was still in the corner of the room though, so it's not like he left. Maybe he ran to the bathroom. Either way, I didn't look around for him. I went back to my room and kept the door open a crack. It was a long time that I didn't hear Jason leaving the bathroom though, or simply laying back down on the couch for that matter. So I was going to get back up and look around for him just because I was concerned. But as I got up, I started hearing these ticking or clicking sounds, kind of like a rodent. I looked around the dark room, and only then did I notice Jason standing in the corner of my room, arms flat at his sides. I let out a scream and jumped, startled as putting how I felt mildly. Yes, even in this dark room, I was able to realize it was Jason. I threw my pillow at him and yelled, "What the actual hell are you doing?" He flinched and he stopped making the ticking noises, then walked out of my room in this stiff, creepy manner. I heard him basically collapse onto the couch. I stepped out into the living room to try to talk to him. He didn't answer. I realized he must have been sleepwalking. The next morning I asked him about it, and he said he didn't remember any of it. I asked him if he tends to sleepwalk. He said no, or at least not that he was aware of. But other than that, the day was pretty normal. We chatted and hung out in the living room for a while. Then I had to go out and run some errands. He'd be staying one more night at my place. I once again woke up randomly in the middle of the night. This time I wasn't thirsty, so I don't know what woke me up. But for curiosity's sake, I got up to check if Jason was on the couch. He wasn't. Not again. I called Jason's name pretty loud. He wasn't in the bathroom or the kitchen, nor did he seem to be in my room. I climbed back into bed and tried texting his phone, but nothing delivered, so it seemed to be off. I called his name one more time, really loud, and then I heard this disturbing, muffled speaking sound. I looked at the closet where it was coming from, and I saw through the 6-inch opening, Jason's face in the dark, peeking through the door, his hands over his mouth. I yelled at him full volume to get him out of my closet. He didn't listen. He had to be sleepwalking again. I went to the closet to open it fully. I grabbed his arm and pulled it to get him out of the closet. But as I did that, I saw the big carving knife in his hand. I looked at his half-lifeless looking face and ran to the bathroom and locked myself in. I considered calling the police, but I didn't. I waited until I heard him go back to the couch. Then I ran to my room and locked the door. I didn't understand how sleepwalking could escalate to a level that he'd be picking up weapons. It didn't seem right. Laying in my bed at 3 in the morning, I DM'd his roommate telling him what just happened and asking him what happened between the two of them. He didn't reply until the next morning. I woke up to 3 long DMs from his roommate. Basically, in short, he told me Jason is a sicko freak who needs help, and he said Jason came into his room with a knife the last night he was there and was standing at the foot of his bed before he tackled him to the floor. He said Jason claimed it was sleepwalking, but his roommate didn't believe it. This made the whole thing even scarier because Jason told me that he doesn't sleepwalk, or not that he's aware of. I asked Jason to leave that day because of what was going on. He did so. I think he went back to his mom's house. Jason and I still follow each other on social media, but I kind of faded things out from him after that. I still don't know what to make of him or the fact that he brought a knife into more than one person's room in the middle of the night. This is a deeply personal and disturbing story. I'm not sure why I'm choosing to share it with the internet, but here goes. I don't have too many friends. Up until a few days ago, I looked at this guy Milo as my best friend for a while. I met him in one of my college classes. We got along mostly because we always cheated on tests together and helped each other to find the answers for our homework assignments. Eventually, we started hanging out outside of class, and I would sooner or later start telling him a lot of personal stuff that I didn't tell many other people. Just because I felt most comfortable with him didn't mean I saw him as this super high quality, genuine guy. He was just someone I thought was somewhat there for me. There was this one night I didn't have plans, so I hit him up and he suggested we hit one of the bars in town. I drove the two of us there since I wasn't planning on getting too drunk. This night though, he for whatever reason decided to get blackout wasted, ordering shot after shot, mixed drink after mixed drink. I had a couple drinks and cut myself off so I could drive.
Milo was so drunk that he was approaching random girls and saying some pretty foolish things that were causing me to cringe. At one point I had to apologize to these two girls for him and tried to make light of it, but really the night just wasn't going the way I wanted it to, which was to have a chill, laid-back night out with my friend. He made it stressful, so I pulled him out of the bar and sat him in my car to drive us back to his apartment. I'd never actually been inside of his apartment before. This was the first time. I walked him inside and laid him down on his couch, where he instantly seemed to just crash and pass out. He dropped his phone out of his hand and onto the floor but didn't flinch. So yeah, he was out. His phone was on and unlocked though. Honestly, I always wondered what the hell Milo even did for work, considering he always seemed to be down to spend money but never talked about work. In a perfect world, I shouldn't have done this, but I picked up his phone and started going through his camera roll. I don't know what I was expecting to find, honestly. I was really just being a sneaky snoop, but I was doing it because I often thought Milo was a little sketchy and was hiding some things. His camera roll was full of junk, like screenshots of websites, texts, and a bunch of selfies. So I went to the albums section and found this suspicious album titled Girls. I opened it expecting to find nudes or porn pictures or whatever, but no, it was much worse. What I found in there were pictures of young women tied up to a bed, and a lot of the pictures the women were visibly distressed and crying. I won't get into any graphic detail, but the pictures were disturbing. I thought maybe they were from the internet at first, but I took note of the blue bed cover. I went to Milo's room and flicked on the light. When I saw the blue bed cover, I shook my head in disgust, and I guess because I actually had no idea how to feel. I sent a couple of the pictures to myself, then deleted the texts off his phone. I put the phone back on the floor next to him and left. The next day he texted me, "I know you went in my room. We need to talk now." He followed that up with, "If you saw any pictures, they were just role-playing pictures." I ignored him. I didn't know how he knew I saw the pictures though, and I don't know how he knew I was in his room. That next night he came to my door and rang the bell like 30 times. I ignored it. And hours later, when I was trying to sleep, rocks were thrown at my window, and I heard Milo outside calling up to me. Moments later, I heard him trying to open one of my windows. That's when I picked up my phone and called him, and yelled at him to simply leave me alone or I would be calling the cops. Then I hung up. He didn't text me or call me again. I still have those two pictures on my phone, and I'm really wondering what I should do and how I should proceed with it. If he really knows I saw those pictures, I don't know if he's going to target me if he gets the chance, or if he's going to move out or what, but at this very moment, I'm a little scared for my well-being. I work at a middle school as an 8th grade math teacher. Some of you may assume that means I'm like 38 or something, but I'm actually only 26. I was hired young. I'm not saying I'm immature or anything, just that if I was 10 or 20 years older, I may have handled things differently. Of course, this happened during a period that I was teaching a class. The math wing in our school is closest to the lobby. I remember it like it was yesterday, down to the equation I was writing on the board when the lockdown alarm suddenly sounded. It wasn't a drill. All faculty and students are taught which alarms mean what, and this was the alarm that meant go into lockdown for real, not a drill. I hurried to the door to lock it. Each door in the building has a big glass panel in it though, so the doors have little blinds that you could pull down to cover this. Even though we're supposed to pull down the blinds during lockdowns, we're also supposed to instruct students to hide in one corner of the room with the lights off. As I turned off the lights in the classroom, I told the students to go hide in the corner of the room where we would be least visible and audible from the door. I saw the lights in the hallways dim to just the backup lights, something I'd never seen before till that point. I was slightly worried because I knew this had to be serious, and like I said, the math wing is right by the lobby. My classroom is one of the first classrooms you pass as you're going through one of the 2 hallways that veer from the lobby. I was curious, so using the classroom phone, I called the front office. They didn't pick up after 4 rings, so I hung up. I wasn't endangering anyone to my knowledge because the front office is behind 2 doors and the phone wouldn't be heard from the lobby. But still, them not picking up was concerning.
There was suddenly a knocking on the door, a frantic, panicked knocking, accompanied with someone on the other side of the door begging to be let in. It wasn't a student, the voice was way too deep. It sounded to me like a guy in his early 20s, if I had to guess. I went to the door quietly and saw the person's shadow on the other side of the blind. He started saying he could see me through the blind and knew I could hear him. He kept saying let me in this scared-sounding kind of whimpery voice. I looked to my students. Some of them had scared, confused looks on their faces. I signaled for them to keep quiet. Then I asked through the door, "Who's there? What's your name?" He said his name was Cody and that he was a student and needed to get into the classroom because he felt unsafe in the halls. When he told me this, I noticed he seemed to be trying to talk in a slightly higher pitch. I wasn't falling for it. There was no way that voice belonged to a middle schooler. I ignored him and went back to the corner by the students. The guy on the other side of the door started knocking harder now, fiddling with the doorknob and then kind of thrashing at the door, all while still saying, "Help, let me in." I did my best to keep my students from screaming or freaking out. The guy eventually gave up and the noises stopped. We stayed in lockdown for half an hour before an announcement was made that police had searched the building and it was safe. So later on, faculty was given more details, and apparently some 20-something-year-old guy with long hair down to his shoulders was walking around the school with a small handgun. Whether it was a real gun or not remains unknown, but the guy was caught on camera leaving the building through a back exit, and he was found by police 2 hours later, not holding the gun. I think I could have handled the situation a little better. For example, not even answering the guy when he was at the door, but I was so nervous that I really wasn't thinking logically. It's scary to think about what might have transpired if I opened the door for him. This was back in my university days, not too long ago. I was in between classes with an hour-long gap. I had to go to the bathroom, but I didn't like using the bathrooms that most other people use. There were a couple restrooms on campus that were never really used. For example, the activity center building's bathroom. Our school's activity center was usually a ghost town during early day hours, and it was next to the building where I'd be having my next class, so it wasn't like it was far away. Inside the lobby of the activity center, some guy was sitting on a desk looking down at his phone. He looked up at me as I passed and said good morning. I said it back and proceeded around the curved hallway to the restrooms. While I was in one of the stalls, the door to the restroom opened and a man asked if anyone's in here. Being that it was the women's restroom, I was a little weirded out by that. I didn't answer. The door to the restroom closed, but I heard footsteps come up to my stall and stop. There was a light tap on the stall door with one of his fingers, I'd presume. Then, in that ever so tiny crack in the door, I saw the man pressing his face up through it. I saw his eye looking in for a second. I gasped and said, "Someone's in here." He replied back asking why I didn't answer him, then told me this building and all nearby buildings are going into lockdown because of an apparent student who was sighted with a weapon. I didn't understand why he was in the women's bathroom with me though. I left the stall to be face to face with him, and it was that guy that was sitting on the desk before. I was guessing he was the front desk worker or whatever for this building. He had to be trustworthy. He showed me a text on his phone from a random number, and it was a warning from the university to stay inside whatever building and classrooms you're in and to lock all the doors due to a potentially armed individual on campus. I found that alarming, so I felt comfortable with him going to blockade the bathroom door with a garbage bin. After he did that though, the two of us just stood in the bathroom together, awkwardly, like I was trying to ask him for more details about the potentially armed person on campus. He said he had no other information on it though. Something about the way he was looking at me relentlessly, like no social cues or when to stop staring at me. I felt uneasy. I pulled out my phone to create a buffer, and as I was on my phone, I thought to just look for a similar text from the school that he showed me, but I didn't get any text from the university. I went to the school's website, which would often have news and alerts. It didn't have anything about it though. I asked this man's name, and he said his name was Eli, that he worked in the building. Now that I thought about it though, his outfit consisted of light blue bootcut jeans with brown boots and a gray hoodie. He looked, if anything, like a maintenance worker. Instead of trying to continue the conversation with him, I was on my phone texting friends, any friends who I knew were on campus at the moment, asking if they heard anything about this armed person. I had 2 friends text back saying no, class was in session like normal. I looked up at the man, who was now even closer to me. Time stopped moving in that instant. He looked at the door, then whispered to me that he thought he heard something, that we should make a move to one of the stalls and hide. I froze, both physically and mentally. He started to walk up to me with his arms slightly extended out to nudge me into one of the stalls with him. At this point, the only thing I could do was scream, as loud as I could. I caught him off guard, and I think he went into full-on panic mode because he looked around the room and then hurried to move the trash bin away from the door and storm out of the bathroom. I proceeded to leave the bathroom a few seconds after him, running to the nearest exit. From there, I called my mom to cry to her about it. She actually called campus police for me and then drove to the school to meet me, and that's when I told campus police about the man, with my mom there to support me. A day later, I received a call from campus police, and they said they reviewed the footage caught in the building and could confirm that man did not work at the school and that they would do their best to find out who he was. I never received any future updates. It was ninth period, the end of the school day, senior year of high school. Ninth period was one of my off periods, so my school days would be a little shorter. A couple of my friends also had their schedules set up that way, Ryan and Scott. Our third friend Tyler had off ninth period every other day. This was one of the days he didn't have off, but since it was Friday and a nice day out, we were all texting each other making plans to hit the beach. Tyler was talking about sneaking out of gym early to come with us, so we were waiting in the hallway by the gym. This hall was in the far corner of the school. The only people passing were students going to gym class. Tyler texted us that he was just going to wait till the gym teacher took attendance, then sneak back to the locker room and meet us in the hall. We waited there for a decent minute. He was taking a while for some reason. There's a set of exit doors at the end of the gym hall we were standing in. It wasn't supposed to be used as an entrance, yet here came some guy through the doors. Even though it was a really nice day out, this guy came through the two doors in the hall wearing black sweatpants and a black zipper-up hoodie with the hood over his head. He was also wearing a black backpack. We went silent as he walked past us, making a point of looking at all three of us with this dagger of a stare. Ryan stepped up and said, "What, dude? Fuck off." And the guy stopped in his tracks and turned to face Ryan and ask him if he's got a problem. Scott and I stepped in and just said forget it over and over until the guy turned and kept walking. We all agreed that guy seemed extremely sketchy. He looked like he could have been a student, but none of us recognized him. He had a little facial hair, but it was kind of patchy though. A few minutes later, we texted him asking him to hurry up, and he texted back he couldn't sneak out just yet since we're in lockdown. This was a shock to us because we weren't aware of this. He said the gym teachers announced it and everyone was hiding in the locker rooms. We also just realized the doors separating the gym hallway from the actual locker room hallway were closed and locked. We immediately linked it to that creepy looking dude dressed in all black who just walked past us. The reality hit us so much harder when there were these popping sounds from down one of the hallways. At first they sounded like maybe a teacher slamming books on a desk as if to wake a student up or something, but we quickly put two and two together and realized they were gunshots. The sounds of students screaming quickly followed. Next thing we knew, we saw that guy in the black appear down the hall, and he was running full speed towards us. The three of us ran out the two doors that the guy entered from, and all the way to the woods next to the school. In that moment, I felt the curtains of life slowly closing, and the thought of death becoming a reality. I looked back twice as we ran, and saw that guy was chasing us, but he was kind of far away. He screamed stuff at us, most of it inaudible, but I did make out him saying, "I'm gonna kill you, Fed." We made it to the woods by hopping the fence that surrounds the perimeter of the school, and when we had a nice shield of trees covering us from view, we stopped to catch our breath. We decided to wait it out, laying flat on the ground to avoid detection. We then heard footsteps nearby. They got louder and louder until I could see him running through the woods looking for us. He ran further away from us, not noticing us, and when he was out of sight, we all agreed to run for it back to the senior parking lot. Between the running and the shock of the near-death experience we just had, I don't know how I didn't vomit. We got to my car and I drove all three of us to my house. Obviously the beach idea was out the window now. It later blew up on social media in our high school class group chat that one of the new teachers was shot by the guy and was sent to the hospital in an ambulance. He survived, but everyone thought he was going to die considering he got shot twice. No one knows who that guy was or why he targeted that one specific teacher. I'm sure he went after us because Ryan antagonized him. He probably waited to come back for us, or Ryan specifically, because he didn't want to alert the whole school with a gunshot. Who knows though? But that wouldn't have really mattered anyway because the school was already tipped off by a nearby house about him because he was seen pissing on their property before going to the school, not to mention the way he was dressed on an 80-degree day. I consider this a near-death experience, and I count my lucky stars I survived.